I was the deputy CFO. I don't know if you know Sean. Sean's a long-serving staff member of the AOE, was promoted sometime here during the pandemic, Sean. I forget how long that's been. And I think you all know Mr. James, who's in the room with you, and also Ted Fisher, who's the director of our communications and legislative affairs staff. It's good to be with you virtually, nonetheless. Um, and to the chair's prompt in terms of giving you a summary, I guess I'll do that, then I can turn it over to staff if you have detailed questions. We did provide two documents. One is a PowerPoint presentation in the form of a PDF document. That's the one I'll speak to. I think that's the best document to use for the high level summary. And in terms of your prompt, Madam Chair, in terms of what's going on, I mean, we're still very much administering the recovery phase of the pandemic. But in terms of that PowerPoint, I'd start, I can certainly go into more introduction, but I would recommend starting on slide 12, which essentially is the budget summary. And then maybe Sean, if you want to share that. Oh, there it is. Perfect. Thank you. And then go to the next slide or go to slide 13, Sean. So in terms of, just real quick, there's nothing really new going on inside the agency other than managing the unprecedented global pandemic and the recovery aspects. A lot of federal dollars flowing through the agency, unprecedented numbers of federal dollars. So that's a big focus of what we're doing. But essentially our budget, not much going on, and I'll explain why in a minute, but it's up 6.5%. Not going to talk a lot about the Ed Fund today. Mr. James, I'm sure, would be glad to come in and talk to you at great length about what's going on in the Ed Fund. But there's not a lot going on there either, other than a lot of good news. So general ask is a 6.5% increase. And then why? Why don't we skip ahead, Sean, to slide 18, I think, basically goes over the causes of that request.
A lot of them are just the usual internal service fund, ADS,
yep.
And salaries, but you've got 5 positions there. So
yeah, and this is really the bulk of the increase you can see. And this these were enacted last year, Act 127, and we were required to fund those. They weren't funded last year, but the positions were created. So we have those positions now established in our budget. The positions are essentially associated to the implementation of the pupil weights. So a new approach to doing income, standing that up at the state level. Also, the related work relative to student nutrition, and then an additional position to support English language learner assessment and additional professional development support. So that's the bulk of everything that's new in the agency as a result of Act 127. There's some really minor things I just call your attention to in the 178,000, the last bullet on that slide. We built out a better, we call resource center, which is a better communications hub as a result of the pandemic. The bulk of the Agency of Education's work in COVID-19 was a communications support exercise. So we've built out some new tools. We have some software in there. We have a very successful model of an internship program we're quite excited about. I think that's around 60 grand of that, Bill, somewhere in that ballpark. So this allows us to establish some data interns with some higher ed partners. So hopefully it'll beef up our capacity, also share some expertise with real world expertise with higher ed students, and also maybe perhaps help us recruit people in the future. So we're really excited about that. And then last but not least, we are increasing the Vermont Teacher of the Year subsidy. Previously it was $2,500. We're bumping it up to $5,000. So just something we noticed that program needs a little more support. So, that's it in a nutshell in our budget. Again, I can't really say it's business as usual because the business we've been doing in the last 3 years or so has been anything but usual. But most of the staffing impact that we're seeing is a result of legislation that was enacted last year. We have major policies in flight relative to Act 127, the pupil weights and so forth, Act 173, the special ed reform. So there's a lot of things going on. But then just some small tweaks relative to the internship program, resource center, et cetera. Then to your point, Madam Chair, it's salaries and the cost of doing business, internal service fund transfers and so forth. So that's really a 30-second synopsis of our budget. Happy to go into greater detail or answer any other questions you might have.
I'll look around the committee, questions that you might have. obviously the big money is in the education fund and to fund our K through 12 system, and the budget funds the agency itself. Are there any bills that are currently underway that are going to impact you in some significant way? I don't know, the education committees, anything, Brad?
Yeah. I don't know, I'd say significant, but there's, there's a number of items that add up, So we're spending a lot of time responding to those, a study here, a study there, a new initiative here, a new initiative there, and making sure that there's funds appropriated at the end of the day. So that process is very much underway, but there's no really big initiative, I would say.
So one of the requests that we have on our list, as we told the appropriation, came out of an education bill here in the Senate, was 100,000, I believe, to study curriculum and look at the differences, between schools. And could you speak to that process, how that information, we certainly know that bigger schools have, a broader array of courses, and there's some reciprocity, or kids can take courses from other schools. What is the end goal of that? Are you talking about a statewide curriculum? What could you just help us?
Sure.
We consider that 100,000. Is that something you requested?
No. This is an issue, and you kind of hit the nail on the head with, I would say, statewide curriculum, but this is not something we requested. It's been part of an ongoing policy conversation in the first half of the session. But just to sort of put it in context, I don't think necessarily it's a new conversation. But in Vermont, the State Board of Education promulgates curriculum standards, things like the Common Core you might have heard about, but then local school boards adopt curriculum. So at the state level, we don't promulgate curriculum. Sometimes we get involved in making recommendations on what is good curriculum, good materials, that kind of thing, but we're not at the state level responsible for curriculum, unlike many states. So I think there's been renewed interest this session, is my editorial comment, things like Holocaust studies or literacy reform, trying to understand financial literacy, I think is one that's been in the media lately, to understand what's going on in terms of curriculum at the local level, and perhaps start to explore to what extent the state should get more forceful in directing curriculum. But it's a hard thing to study per se. One of the, as this conversation emerged, one of the things I suggested it might be a useful approach is to do a curriculum inventory, picking a handful of districts as sort of a study or a sample group, as opposed to trying to do it statewide, because the quality of the data statewide is going to be relatively poor. A lot of the curriculum isn't well documented. We're not a state that has a really solid track record in terms of formal adoption of curriculum. So you wouldn't be able to go, for example, to school board meeting minutes, because school boards ultimately are responsible to law for adopting curriculum materials. You're not going to find in the minutes of school boards what curriculum did they adopt. I would be surprised to find that. But what some districts do, particularly our larger districts, is periodically they'll do what's called a curriculum inventory. And I think if we approach that on a sort of a sampling approach, that might be useful to provide some information as to what's going on in terms of our districts in terms of curriculum adoption. But I think, that's sort of my editorial analysis of why this policy initiative is coming forward. It's not something we sponsored per se, but I think there's renewed interest in perhaps exploring, I would say, state curriculum, but to what extent should we get more formal as a state in understanding what curriculum is being adopted at the local level?
Okay. So the way the language, in terms of what the purpose, you had talked about looking at selected number of schools. Is that what is being proposed in that bill? I don't know where that is at the moment. I think it's gone back and forth, but we can certainly track that down. And Ted in the room would be a good person to get back to you on that. Well, I thought I would just bring it up because that's something set aside, and wanted to know more about it. We only have about $400 million of requests, so yeah. And our budget. Our budget, the 6.5%, didn't include those kinds of items. So we were very much focused on, let's say, business as usual. Again, I can't understate, we are managing incredibly complex programs right now quite successfully, but there's a lot of programs, a lot of grants, unprecedented number of grants and federal dollars flowing through the agency right now.
those programs and grants essentially expire in 2024. But we were not looking for new things to do this session, certainly. So this is an example of what I'd call one of these small one-off issues, and they do add up, and we're monitoring all of them very closely because they have to be funded at the end of the day, but they're not necessarily ones we would support or as a priority anyway.
And you have other studies that you've been assigned as well?
Those again are being contemplated, absolutely. So it's too early to tell, but yeah, every year that's essentially a compromise position in my experience that gets put on the table at the end of the session. Once an initiative isn't funded, someone will say, well, let's study it. You know?
Or it's difficult and we can't find an easy solution, so we want to study it too.
Right.
You have something more?
Ted Fisher, Director of Communications and Legislative Affairs. I just wanted to note it's S133, which is the miscellaneous ed bill from your body, which has just landed today in House Education, having passed on the 30th.
I know that, I know. And when it came here, we amended it and stripped out the 100,000 of the study. That's why I'm asking to get some background, because ultimately we've got to decide, do we want to fund that in our budget? So that's the reason for the question here is the bill, as we passed it, has no funding for that purpose. And it's going to have to be evaluated in the context of, you know, the few other hundreds of millions of dollars.
All right.
Sorry, Madam Chair. With you having deleted section 1, from our perspective, there's no problem. But if you and your colleagues in the House decide that you ultimately want to do the curriculum audit, we would need that funding back in order to administer it.
Yeah, I understand that. I need to be clear. We removed the appropriation from that bill, but when we do that, we add it to our list of requests that we will consider and make a decision to fund or not fund as part of the overall budget process.
Understood.
So we know that if you were to do that and we decided we wanted to, the money would have to go with it. So,
I was going to ask a similar question about S124 because I thought we passed it out, but we didn't. It's still in our committee. So I guess that's a separate question.
What one is that?
That was the creation of the school construction task force.
Oh, yes.
Which also had a little money.
That was another.
That's also on our list.
That's on our list too.
And I will say that is a topic Treasurer Pichek and I are meeting on Friday. So we're continuing that conversation regardless of what approach the General Assembly takes, but we're still working closely together in the agency and the Treasurer's office. We'll continue to explore that topic.
Right. Well, that's why I wanted to ask, because I know you've been Secretary French supporter of school construction attention, let's put it that way, and trying to find a better way to deal with deteriorating buildings. So even though that's just a task force, I was hoping it could be morphed into something else.
But that's on our list.
Yeah, but we didn't pass the bill out, so I was just wondering.
If we decided that when we were tight on time, that if we were going to bring it in, we'd bring the whole bill in because it's a relatively short bill for the task force.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's to be determined.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. Other comments or questions? Questions about the Ed Fund? You want to go on? Brad's here. Any other comments or questions of the Secretary? Otherwise, we'll just go to the Ed Fund.
Sure. Brad James, Agency of Education. We're on this sheet, I guess. And I'm going to just jump to the education fund. Do you all have this one? I do black and white.
I'm sure we
Is it part of the same site?
Yes, they all say page 16, but that's the third page. Third page. And halfway down on this, I guess kind of the turquoise, dark turquoise is special education. That's where I'm starting. So it's a third page.
It's a step. If you take your clip off, it's a separate packet of it. If you take your favorite clip off, separate packet, and go 3 pages in.
Madam Chair, I was going to ask a question about the SAMHSA grant, which is above. that.
Um,
And I guess I just, can maybe Ted answer that or?
Probably either Sean
Oh,
or
yeah,
Sean.
because that's not part of the ed fund, that's a
No,
separate.
I can wait a second if you'd like to ask, so the.
I'd like to know what the SAMHSA grant is for. I know we've lost a lot of federal dollars that would be supportive for a lot of counseling and other work, but
You're talking about the 500,000?
yeah, the 500,000 that's there for the SAMHSA grant.
These are some mental health, to your question, Senator, some mental health grants. And I think, Deputy Secretary Boucher works very closely with Department of Mental Health on that. So that would be I'd flag that for a topic for future testimony if you want to delve into the SAMHSA program.
Okay, and so it looks like it might be replacing some of the federal dollars that we put in place from ESSER 3 last year.
Well, it's federal though,
Yeah,
so-
and no, this is the same, but this would replace what we did for the counseling grants. But anyway, I'll wait and hear another time.
Depends on what permissibility, I guess, so
Yeah.
we can find out more on that. The other question, and Rich, I've been waiting for you to ask about this, why the amount of funding that goes to ABE systems for high school completion.
gonna wait.
Oh, all right, sorry.
What?
Down the flexible pathway section.
Yeah, when we get to the
Sure.
end.
Sure, we-
I-
I'm not sure I can answer that question, but I know who can. So.
Well, I don't expect you to know everything. You
Well, I don't
may have an
know.
opinion on everything, but
Rest assured.
So we'll go to,
Okay. So page 3, special education. Sean has it up there. We are going to the second year of the census block grant in FY '24, so the special ed costs are coming down. And we're asking for basically $226 million, which is an increase of about $18 million. A lot of that has to do with the inflation factor that is in the census block grant and the way the calculation is being done. We also have in there extraordinary special education costs, which seem to be going up from what I'm hearing from people in the field.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
yes.
On adverse impact rule, which you probably don't know about. So I know Secretary French, the end of last session, they're in a position to delay that rule another year. I don't know if it affects the budget, but I don't know if the agency is continuing to recommend delay of that rule.
No, you might remember, Senator, I did change my position at the end of the session in favor of delay, but that was largely even last spring. We didn't know what the fall would bring us in terms of COVID. So my recommendation was really based on the operating environment relative to COVID-19. We don't support further delay at this time.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Other questions? Otherwise, we seem to have a lot of page 16s, don't we?
Yes, we do.
It's a popular thing.
Because we don't hate each other.
Yes. All right, so we're here on 220.
226 million.
Yeah. Other questions? I on the block grant and special ed, some schools found that very difficult and others did not. And how is that going at this point?
We're sorting that out. We have one district, one SU, I should say, that has said we can't do it on this, and we're looking at giving them more money. We have money set aside for this purpose. They're really the only ones that I've heard about making that request. I think there are other districts out there though that are struggling. I'm not, the folks aren't in communication of what I'm hearing. Second, third hand, some are struggling. But again, what's happened is they're struggling, it's tending to go into their general education fund. So it's not on the special education side of ours, it's kind of rolled over education spending than anything else. I think that's probably happened a little more than we like it to, but I think that's where we are. The idea was that people were going to change their practices, and while the census blocker came in and the new pupil rates were coming in, so they're also just kind of interplay nicely. It didn't work that way in COVID. Right? So it's, we're kind of scrambling as our
Other questions people might have of Brown? Did you retire?
Not yet. No, she's still there.
He's here as a volunteer.
I came out here for Madam Chair last year when it came in, you stopped the committee and said, how about Dr. Brad? I said, well, I guess it's out now. No, we're looking for, just, everybody, we're looking for a replacement for me. I will work with that person for a while. I will certainly be here through tax rate season. I'm kind of thinking probably end of October, middle of October, end of October, on the hard stuff.
Well, there are a lot of challenges, certainly COVID and the impact, and then of course the inventory and the condition of our school buildings and how that gets addressed and what will be. I mean, I think the artificial turf proposal and the millions of dollars raised the question about, and I think the treasurer's talked about maybe we should do like some other states and have I don't know, sort of model standardized school building design. And so all of that, I think, is ahead of us. A lot of work. Okay. Yes,
So
no,
is he done?
I think, I'm looking.
So your adult basic education piece is on page 4. And we have a request from adult basic education for $1.5 million this year for an increase in general fund.
Okay.
And if you look at their high school completion numbers from adult basic education, since 2017, they're down $2.5 million in ed fund. And what the adult basic education people say is that they have just as many students getting their GEDs and working towards at least an equivalency of a high school degree. And what the when you probe a little deeper, what they say is that it's because the rules and that the education agency has set is taking people out of the pipeline, the normal pipelines, and that's why the funding from the ed fund to AB is down to $2.5 million. And in many respects, and I'll say it right up front, for some of the people that are getting their GEDs and working in another pathway to do something equivalent to a high school completion, I look at that and say those are kids, or those are young people that we might have failed in the system. And why wouldn't we use education funds to get them into a position where they were better place in life?
And I guess the one thing I need to understand, because I thought high school completion was really, you were doing that under the supervision of a post high school. Sometimes kids might be taking 1 or 2 courses. So are you talking about GED, or are you talking about the diploma as well?
I'm just trying to, I see the numbers.
If the enrollment is the same, why is the level of financial support declined so precipitously during this period of time? I guess is a concern.
Well,
And what is popping out is general fund. We need to have you give us more money.
yeah, they're asking for $1.5 million from us in general fund. And I look at that, if you're getting your GED, that's the equivalent to a high school. And it's hard for me to understand what's going on.
I was at the local one in St. Johnsbury, and there was a student there that just was not thriving in the local school and was using that as the alternative pathway for, she was studying civics, as a matter of fact. So, which I thought was quite good. But it does raise the question around the funding. So if you could, maybe that, or whoever's listening, I see the secretary still on.
Yeah.
Ted's here, maybe we can get a better understanding of why we've seen that trend, and ultimately the response is, general fund, we need more help.
And
Yeah,
there's a dramatic decrease in education fund going into these people.
I would just, on the senator's theme about the questions, I'll just make the observation to draw a parallel with Act 173 and special ed and the transition from a reimbursement to a block grant. When Act 173 was passed in 2018, the better part of the rationale was that the reimbursement model didn't provide adequate incentives for best practice in terms of instruction, but it also was leading to a lack of predictability in cost, and basically cost being very high. It's important to remember that rationale as we transition to the block grant, implement it. Yes, there'll be people on either side, up or down, but there was a real concern around, let's say, cost containment per se, but this general sort of lack of predictability. And I think, my experience with adult ed is the same at the state level. We hear from providers, it's a diverse group of providers. I mean, what emerged for us in the administration as we were preparing our budget this year is that there is room for us to get far more intentional in adult ed. It's a very important part of our program, along with CTE, and the connection between, say, high school CTE and CCV. I think we would be well served by a state to do some study of adult ed and how it's administered, to ensure that it's consistently administered and that it's administered more effectively, as opposed to sort of wondering what's driving the costs or not. Since we don't really have a single approach to this, it's really hard to understand the dynamics. It makes me feel a little uncomfortable from a budget perspective, but that, I think, is an area where we would benefit as a state to seek to streamline, if you will, the oversight of adult ed and get more intentional. I think there's a great disparity in the regional ecosystems around adult ed. In some regions, they have very vibrant programs, and others really struggle. That's another concern.
Well, I guess another thing to examine, to add to our list of studies. Although I think this program started a long time ago, and oftentimes we need to go back and look at, the system as a whole. But I do know that a lot of students make it through high school because of that resource, and it's complementary, and so how it works and adequacy of funding is a concern. So I don't know. I hate to keep instructing everybody to take a look at something. We love to do that, but it does seem like at some point that's out there, along with the CTE. And we're going to get that update later this week.
In this particular case, a $2.5 million drop for a population of students that really is about the same number of students is a lot.
Well, it is, but until somebody looks at it, we're kind of getting it region by region, and what does it look like statewide? And I don't know if there's anyone that can help us sort that out. But we're sitting here with a request to put more money into to that system, and it does beg the question: what's happening here relative to the decline in funding from this source? I'm going to suggest Senator Starr, and then we need to move on. If you look at where we are on our agenda.
I was just wondering if there was any limit on the number of years a person can start adult ed, not quit, and then start again. And I mean, how many years do we pay for this? And
well, we've got two things. We've got the pathways, alternative pathways, and then we've got, for the over 21. Is that the group you're talking about that don't have the entitlement?
And the other issue is if you sign up for any of these programs, do you have to sign up for these to acquire other public assistance? And, so are we creating numbers because of something else that we're offering these people if they do sign up for adult ed?
Well, there are certain programs, for example, single parents that might not have, and they would get high school, get their GED. But I think what we were talking about are the students under 21 that have the entitlement to a high school education that are using that system to get their high school equivalency of diploma. And then there are the adults you're talking about, and oftentimes that's part of a case plan to get their high school diploma, or sometimes a certification beyond it.
Well, the crew that you're talking about, they quit school or left school for whatever reason. And then when they get to be 19 or whatever age, they can't get a job unless they have a high school degree. I mean, Columbia Forest Products in Newport won't hire a person unless they have graduated from high school or equivalent thereof. So then they go back and they finish up, but there's some reason that the cost has gone down, and we could drill down.
Maybe we can see if we can.
I'll see. I think the person I've talked to in our office is Jessica Carolus.
Okay, that would be helpful,
That would be really
because we're seeing it pop out in the form of a request for increase in general fund.
Before I go, just one last point on the big education fund line. In the budget, we have it at 1.711, almost $1.2 billion. Budgets came in lower than we anticipated. December 1 letters, they're coming in around 1.703. So we're about $8.5 million less than what we anticipated. So one piece of positive news. That was the one that separated from us.
Do we have Barb Neal? Is she removed?
Yeah, they're both.
Thank you, Brad. And I guess we'll have more discussion, and certainly if you can get it.
I'll check.
Check on that. Thank you for those of you who are remote. Thank you very much for being available this afternoon. We're going to move on to the E911 board.
I know.
No, I know, but I thought this issue was different than our tax, or somehow more, it was more capacity, but it's. We, yeah.
Do you think they use this picture from Beacon because it's in your district?
Groton, yes, Owl's Head, I'm sure that's the reason. I don't know.
I know it's their district.
I
They're
just
trying
want
to
to
curry
say,
favor.
I do want to say, I think colored printing is environmentally not great, and I don't know why we need to have,
Not necessarily.
so I'd just like to make a point that,
Edison, this with the fire towers.
all right, so I'm
There's
gonna
a
get
little stone
started when we have Barbara Neal with us. I see we have Roger Marcoux again, and then Brenda Berry is here from the Agency of Administration. So if you would like to introduce yourself for the record, Barbara, we know that there's been a lot going on with 911 and dispatch. And so your budget, we'll start with that, knowing that there's a lot of other stuff that it's related to 911 that's occurring here as well. So
Yes.
I think page 4 is really a good place for you to start. We like it. It's your summary and your highlights, and you would like to put yourself on record, and we'll start from there.
Okay, sure thing. Thank you very much. I am Barbara Neal, Executive Director of the 911 Board. And as you pointed out, the board chair, Roger Marcoux, is also with us here, as is our financial director, Brenda Barry. I think that I have met all of you, or most of you anyway, at some point along the way, but just as a quick refresher, the 911 Board is the single governmental agency responsible for the statewide 911 program system. So that's oversight and management of the 911 system. We're an independent board, not currently attached to any other state agency or department. The board itself consists of 9 members representing state, county, and local law enforcement, fire service, EMS, municipalities, and the public. We currently have 10 full-time staff members, including myself, and 1 part-time administrative support person. And we are currently carrying 1 vacancy in our training and communications department, which we actually hope to have filled in the next week or so. I should note that our FY24 budget request does include a request for the funding and authority to convert that part-time support position into a full-time position. And if you need more details on why we're making that request, I can get to that in just a little bit. Senator Kitchell mentioned page 4 of the budget book, which is where I'll head right now. You can see that our budget request for FY24 is approximately 4.79 million. That is an increase of 4.5% over the FY23 request. That increase is due in large part to increases in salaries and benefits for existing staff, including 1 reclassification request that we are expecting, and the conversion of that part-time position to a permanent full-time position. There have also been increases in the internal service charges and general operating costs, all of which you'll see reflected in our ups and downs chart, which is on page 9 of that of the budget book. So I'll pause here, Senator Kitchell, to hand it back to you to see if there's any particular direction you want me to go now.
Well, this one does not show any general fund though.
It doesn't, the issue is that there's not enough money to come over to build a special fund, and so that's why you see the transfer in the other portion of the budget. Just how we felt it's in the D portion of the language of the budget.
Oh, okay.
The transfer from the general fund to this special fund.
All right.
I could add a little bit on that if you'd like. I'm sorry.
Why don't you speak to that, because we know
Okay.
your funding has been a challenge, and
Sure.
what I was
Yeah.
talking to Stephanie is I remember the fact that there had to be additional general fund to make it
Yes.
work. And so I know that next door they're looking at, and I think probably it's because the Universal Service Fund, I mean, the base is shrinking.
Mhm.
So you can raise your tax, but you can't raise your taxes. They've got to be realistic relative, and so the problem is a shrinking base.
Correct.
And so the House added more general fund. Did the governor's budget also propose that as well to close that?
Yes. Yes. So, and sorry, I should have presented this initially, but as you know, that we've been historically funded by the Vermont Universal Service Fund, which has been having all these troubles over the past several years and not fully funding us. And we've had infusions or transfers from the general fund for, I think it's the last 2 fiscal years. 2. Okay. Thank you, Brenda. And there is in the governor's request or the governor's recommendation, a transfer of $1.3 million from the general fund to the Enhanced 911 Special Fund in FY24. And then another piece of this is in my discussions with House Appropriations, about the budget, I outlined the need or the anticipated need for system refresh funding that will occur over the next couple of fiscal years, which is approximately $815,000. So that $815,000 was added in at House Appropriations. So you'll see the governor's recommend of 1.3 million, and then the additional 815,000 for the anticipated system upgrades that will be happening over the next several
So
fiscal
let me
years.
ask, did you make the request at the time the governor was building the budget and on the 815, or is that something that emerged subsequently?
Well, we were aware of it then. We did point out to the finance and management team that in years past, prior to the troubles with the Vermont Universal Service Fund, we had a line item in our budget that set aside $300,000 a year for system replacement, system refresh, and so forth. And at making some attempt to live within our means when the Vermont Universal Service Fund started having all its troubles, that line item was removed and had not been put back in. Had that line item been intact and able to be supported, we wouldn't be asking for the 815 because we would have 900,000 essentially sitting in the bank. So I think as it went through the process, the budget development process, that is just how it churned out on the other end. We did know, and Brenda, correct me if I'm wrong, that we would have the funds for the FY24 portion of the system upgrade costs. If we would have the funds available, we just need to do a excess receipts request. So we knew that part even when we were having the conversations with finance and management.
Yes.
Thank you. I had a question on page 8 on one of your measures. I just didn't know what it was. The first one, the performance measure, the match percentage phone to map. I wondered if you could just, if you only have these 3 performance measures, I wondered what that one was.
So there's multiple databases that make the 911 system run. And what those are referring to is the match rate between our GIS or mapping data and the address data that is kept and the addresses in the alley database, so the telephone number database, and how well those match. And there's a national standard that they match at 98% or better. And I don't have that page right in front of me, but I believe we're up over 99% of that match. So
9.8.
So that's so that you're dispatching to the right location, basically.
Correct, so that the data is appearing correctly to the call taker on the map. Yeah.
Another question, that when I think of 911, the only kind of concern that I hear from constituents is when they don't have cell service, like to call 911.
Right.
I didn't know how that overlaps. If you're dealing with mainly, the way I think of what you deal with is just once you already get the call, but are you also dealing with the system so that the calls get to you?
Well, there are certain requirements specifically for wireless carriers that are set at the federal level for the FCC about the delivery of their customers' 911 calls into our system. So we work with those companies and the other types of telephone companies, VoIP and wireline, to ensure that they are sending 911 calls to the appropriate interface, point of interface. But we do not regulate. There are certain requirements that we place on telephone companies, but the regulation for wireless is primarily at the FCC level.
So I guess that's part of the dispatch bill about maybe having you work with the broadband board about, whether it be cellular or broadband, so that more people can make 911 calls if you're in a dead zone.
Right. And my testimony on that has been that well, let me back up. Certainly the 911 board supports the addition or the growth of wireless coverage and broadband coverage throughout Vermont for all purposes. What I've testified for on the dispatch bill is that perhaps the group that's going to be responsible for that focus on that impact of wireless coverage and broadband, whatever else, specifically on public safety communications. So I'm making a bit of distinction there just so that that part of the project doesn't get too unwieldy, in my view. But yes, we certainly would, we certainly support more increased coverage and accessibility for all types of phone calls, including those to 911.
So I wanted to just go back to the system refresh. And is there, what needs to be done with your system? And if we move forward with that dispatch bill, which would create a different board, an expanded board and expanded responsibility, would that have, and looking at that statewide dispatch system, and we have money that we've set aside to support that rollout, would that, would your system be, that you would, this project to refresh your system, would that be altered or modified, or to what extent does that larger dispatch discussion impact what you would need to do for the 911 system right now?
Right, so I don't believe it would have an impact, because regardless of what direction that goes, that conversation on dispatch goes in, we will still need to have a statewide 911 system. I do see that in whether there's an evolution of the 911 board, or if control of the 911 or the dispatch function rather is taken on by the Department of Public Safety or whoever, that there will be opportunities down the road for how those systems integrate with each other, and perhaps that those can be done differently or better once certain standards are in place, or there's some consistency and a plan for how the regional dispatch model is expected to roll out. But the short answer to your question is no, I don't see it impacting the need to refresh the system, the 911 system, which would happen by 2025. That would be the 5th year of our current contract.
Just thought I would ask if there was some kind of interplay there that would make a difference. Other questions, Barbara? Obviously, the funding and the revenue decline. I believe we've got a system where that universal service fund revenues are allocated over 3, and I think I don't know who's number 3. Maybe you are. But where we have the problem with by the time the other 2 get funded,
right,
this is not adequate.
That has certainly been part of the challenge, is that we're at the bottom of the waterfall of distribution from that fund, and so if part of the solution were to move us higher up in that hierarchy, that might be good, though it's not lost on me that the other programs would then have a problem. So I'm not quite sure how to solve that, but it certainly has impacted us. And I just want to mention on the costs, you were talking specifically about system refresh costs, and if there were a change in the model of who is responsible for dispatch, and you will see part of this in S39, at least as it's currently written, there would be a need for additional staff at the 911 board. So, but that's a separate, I think, than the question that you were asking me specifically about the system refresh.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I would understand the other parts. I was just wondering about the 815,000.
Right. Okay.
And okay. Other.
So that's within here.
The house. No, it's in the house. The request was made.
So do the cell phone holders, do they pay money in?
To the universal service fund.
They do. So why, if we're running short on that fee, why isn't that raised?
Well, the finance committee has been looking at the revenues into that, the base. Maybe Stephanie can explain it better. It's actually declined.
Yeah, so the base of, that we are applying the current 2.4% has declined. It's pretty much flattened out, but the growth in cost has gone up with what it funds. What the committees, the Finance Committee and the Ways and Means Committee are looking at, is there other way to levy an assessment, a per line connection assessment that does raise more money, but that is still a relatively flat base in terms of growth in the number of lines, the number. So people have given up their landlines and gone to a cell phone. Same thing with companies. They, people use their personal cell phone sometimes for commercial work. So that's those are the dynamics. But at the same time, the programs that this fund supports don't have flat cost needs.
No.
Their cost needs grow. And
Because
so that
wages
creates a
and
gap.
So why haven't we raised the cell phone rate? I mean, we know that's what's going on.
So the rate is a flat rate in statute, 2.4%.
On the value.
Right now on the percentage against the cost of service on your phone bill, whether it's a mobile phone.
Tax on the-
Yeah, you see it on if you study your bill, you will see a universal service fund charge.
Is it on tax percentage of the amount on the bill or percentage of something?
I think it's the percentage of the amount of the bill right now.
But they're looking, I mean, that's.
Yeah, but that's the struggle with it, is that it's.
And then we took a certain, for example, the funding of the broadband board, that was something Senator Ash put in, allocated money for broadband, and that's what's supporting. So that's what we're talking about, the 3 defined uses of the fund and the monies. And 911's number 3, and you can see what's happening here, so. But they're talking about it as part of the dispatch as well. Okay, well, thank you. There's a lot more to be done, certainly, as we look at the whole dispatch and the 911 system. And the budget's pretty straightforward, but I think probably what we do next into the future is probably where the interest will lie, and the money that we have to get a statewide system set up for dispatch. So thank you again, and thank you, Roger, for tuning in. Always good to see you. And with that said, I am going to move on to the Department of Libraries. You're welcome to stay if you want, but
Thank you.
okay, thank you. So we will. Same picture. Okay.
Is that the share?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
I thought he looked familiar.
Yeah, that's Roger too.
Yeah.
Yeah, Roger. Oh, I know.
Senator Burt's desk.
It's kind of confusing, but not only are they use the same, all state use the same picture.
Everything from the agency administration.
They're required to.
I think we could get a picture of JP.
I know. There's nothing beautiful in your district.
I would like to tell you the sunrise. I overlook the White Mountain Range.
Oh, that's pretty good.
And this morning, it was a beautiful red sunrise about, I don't know, 5:45, 5, I don't remember. And I took a photograph of it, but it didn't have the intensity of the red. It never does.
Sharon was red in the morning.
I know.
Next to be our picture.
Yeah, it could be, but of the White Mountain.
Yeah, they don't wanna-
Yeah, I think that would be really good. I
I
can see New Hampshire from where I live.
I look right up at the greens and think they're beautiful.
Well, your orientation is just a little different. I am just up on the
Yeah,
hill.
you look at New Hampshire.
I do. I can see the tram house on Cannon Mountain and the light. Wow, really? And Mount Washington, and of course, you can tell the weather by how the mountains look.
Can you see the train?
No, I can't quite do that. Well, welcome. We need to get going here. You can look at behind you and see what we have.
Oh, wow.
So we have general services and labor and transportation and liquor and lottery after library. So we'll get started. And welcome, if you want to put yourself on record. We will go through very quickly. This is obviously Senate appropriations time is on the budget is much more constrained than the House. So we find these kinds of sheets particularly helpful in terms of your budget request and a sense of what your department is doing.
My name is Catherine Milnow, and I'm the state librarian and commissioner of the Department of Libraries. Would you like me to share an overview of the department, or do you want to just go into?
I think we just should go into your budget summary and highlights. We've many of us have been here through, I hate to say it, a number of state library. And, from what we did with the state law library over, so I think for the purposes of this, we have a fairly experienced committee, so.
Excellent.
So if you want to proceed with your budget request and also sort of the highlights and what you would like to really take this opportunity to share for information with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me to be here today. I know that your time is limited, and I appreciate that you asked us to come in. I'm happy to answer all of your questions. Our budget is pretty straightforward this year. We stayed within the 3% of increase that the governor had recommended for us. So that doesn't even quite cover the cost of increases in salaries and benefits.
Yeah, so how did you do that to stay within 3%?
We have, in addition to our general fund money, we also have federal funding from LSTA that's increasing slightly, but we also have some funds, a special fund called the Smith Fund, and so we leverage that for some additional.
Is that the
support.
35,000 on your ups and downs sheet? It says special, and so you have a total.
Yeah, I believe that's the correct. We had, we receive a disbursement from that fund each year, and there was supplemental money there, so we used it to offset some of our youth services programs, which is how it's meant to be spent. So there's not really actually that much change over what we have presented in past budget years.
No, I guess the total of your increase is just $84,000.
Yeah.
It's pretty straightforward. What do you, so in light of your budget, which is pretty, which I don't mean to minimize it compared to some of the budgets we see, like the Medicaid program is small. What do you see as a librarian, sort of the role of the state libraries, and what are going to be some of your priorities or initiatives as you're looking for the year ahead?
We really focus right now on providing centralized services that people throughout the state can use to really supplement what they have locally in their municipalities. So in addition to providing direct services to the public who are blind and print disabled, and also to the correctional facilities and to the psychiatric facilities, what we do for Vermonters is provide some services that help people to share resources, like our interlibrary loan service is extremely important and something you've probably been hearing about lately, that books move between institutions so that everyone doesn't have to own the same title. And then Tom McMurdo, our assistant state librarian in Info and Access, his team oversees our databases. So we have the Vermont Online Library, which I hope you all use with your public library card or your state of Vermont library card, or your if you have a school that you belong to. Students and members of the public statewide can use that resource, which is really great. And we've increased some of our resources for people who are doing education and job seeking activities. We've just added Udemy, which is a great resource. So those databases are really key. And then our centralized our administration of the interlibrary loan is really key. And then, of course, we're still using our funding to really enhance programs and services, working in partnership with folks like Vermont Humanities to bring really wonderful presenters and programmers and authors. We've moved to a hybrid model for that. So people, it's not just the people at the library where they visit who can see the author, but also people throughout the state. So those are some of the key things that we're doing right now. We've also, in the past year, you may have heard about this last year or the year before, but we administered $2.1 million in federal ARPA funding So that went out to public libraries all around the state, and we really have just finished spending it. We bolstered our ebook and e-audiobook collection. Those resources are available through the Palace app. You should be seeing a press release come out shortly about that, because we're bringing all of the libraries in the state into that one centralized platform. Our collection serves as the basis for it, but then they have local collections as well.
So what about our academic institutions? They can access all of your resources as well?
They can. Our resources do, I think that they do get some use from academic libraries. I don't know that they're sufficient for all the needs of the students, because we're not buying them in a curricular way. We're not working with their professors and with their students and serving them directly. But they do point the students there so that they don't have to duplicate resources.
Meaning duplicate collections.
Yeah, so because the folks at the schools are part of our public that we serve in Vermont, the students at the academic institutions can use their library card to access our resources, and then they also can access the ones at their institutions as well.
You wanted to add anything? I noticed you're shaking your head.
Oh, no.
In confirmation.
No, yeah. No.
It's always nice to know the person behind you is agreeing with what you're saying, as opposed to.
There is one collection that I do want to mention. We called out a budget line for our correctional facilities and our psychiatric facilities. That's something that we really wanted to be mindful about and make a commitment to them, which they really appreciated.
That's your 39,000.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, so that's the commitment of how much we'll spend to refresh their collections. We used some of the ARPA money that we had to bolster their resources. It was really impactful for them, and so we by statute are obliged to serve them and want to serve them. So we decided to make that a specific budget line so that they could see and we could see what we would dedicate to that work.
So is that an annual thing or just for this?
Well, it's in their base, so
It will be ongoing. So we wouldn't want to cut that because there are 6 correctional facilities, and then I think there are 3.
Psychiatric facilities,
It's the veterans home also.
Oh, yeah, so there are two psychiatric, Middlesex, the status is, I think, unknown, but yeah, there's.
Well, it's moving to Texas, and then Berlin, and then
Those are some of the few folks that we serve directly from the state library, and they're important to us to give them.
So if I were to look at, if you were acquiring, you're talking about library collections for those 2 facilities, but in terms of your overall collections, what line would you be, what line reflects what you're procuring?
I think that the collections for the state library itself, for our facility, for the collections that we house in our facility and the databases that we have,
Right.
They're really built into the base right now. We don't call them out separately.
They're just, except for what you're doing for correctional and psychiatric. That are
We have a
on top
more
of this.
granular kind of breakdown that we have some flexibility with internally, but if you wanted.
We're saving money, we're not gonna put those at a vet's home, Center of Sears, in
Okay.
Bennington, your
Is that okay?
district. Yeah, we thought you'd want us to do that.
I thought this was a Department of Library.
It is, but they buy books, did you know that?
I knew they buy books, but I didn't know they were gonna try.
Well, they do.
Come out of the veterans.
No, they're for correctional and psychiatric facilities, including the vet's home.
And the psychiatric facility.
No, I know.
Are they all physical collections at those institutions?
Right now, the correctional facilities, we've just been giving physical collections to, but we've been in discussion with, we just started discussion with Commissioner Bennell about the idea of having the people in the correctional facilities do what some of the folks in the psychiatric facility are doing, and be able to use their iPads for collections that are geared toward them. We would
There's
have
some
to,
security issues.
we would have to select the collections carefully to align with their collection goals. They have a few things that we should provide resources on.
Other questions? Anything else you'd like to add while you're here?
I would just add that one thing that we have been doing is collecting foreign language materials for ebooks and audiobooks, including many of the languages that refugees that have come to Vermont speak. So we are trying to, I think, under Kathy's leadership, kind of impress the idea that public libraries exist here and they may be different than where some folks have come from. So actually, you say this way better than I do. So
we did have we've developed an informational sheet. We've translated it into the 12 most commonly spoken languages aside from English, and we're sharing that out with everyone. And then through the working group on the status of libraries in Vermont, one of the real needs that we heard was that locally it's very difficult to select and purchase items in non-English languages. So that's something that Tom and his team have been working to bolster with our e-resources so that people can access books in their native languages. We also really encourage libraries to develop EDI collections for equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we gave some ARPA funds grants to folks for that purpose this year. And we also have bolstered, one more thing is that our inclusive services librarian has been bolstering the materials, not just for people who are blind, like the Braille books or the books on tape, but also for people with learning differences. So we've been purchasing for the state library collection, which can then be borrowed out through interlibrary resources for students who are in elementary school who need those resources if they have dyslexia or other print disabilities. Interesting. That's a growing area for us, and we're really committed to kind of meeting the statute, which talks about serving people with disabilities, not limiting it just to the people who have a visual impairment, as the department have done more in the past. Senator Storm.
Yes, so do you buy books that will help the refugees learn English from listening to tapes with their language and then the English version?
we have bought some electronic books so that people can get these without even going to the library. So if there's some barrier for them to be able to get there, they can get the books online. Of course, that's another barrier that I'm sure you're well aware of, but to the extent that that's possible, if they can get somewhere where they can download the book, then we have a number of titles for different languages in terms of English language learners. So yes, we are definitely moving in that direction.
Yes, and phase, how much your books are online and how much are straight paper?
It's a moving target. I would say, do you want to, I'm just keep looking at you, Tom. They want to know all about our collections, and Tom oversees the physical collection.
Last year, what would the split out?
Right now we have under just between 7,500 and 8,000 titles in our ebook and audiobook collections online. And then our physical collections, that's tough. We have some stuff that isn't in the catalog because we have an extensive Vermont legal collection. So we have materials going back to the 18th century, which are very interesting.
Just talk about right
Purchase
now,
what
right
you
now,
today.
yeah.
Today, I think we probably have,
Half an hour?
no, certainly not. We probably have over 100,000 titles in our collection in the physical books. So
No, but
No,
when you acquire new volumes, how many would be hard copy versus ebooks?
well, I think in this past year, we've been focusing on building the ebook and audiobook collection. So that's been probably a little more toward that direction. Although we've added probably roughly 1,000 titles to our physical books. So
we used a lot of the supplemental. In a normal year, it's not been a normal year for 2 years. So we've been using this ARPA environment to bolster the online, which has been growing significantly. Something that we find in Vermont that's really important. Oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed.
Oh, it's very soothing.
I had turned it to like, do not make any noise, and it did it anyway. We do find that people are not just gravitating online as one might have expected, that people of all different ages are continuing to use print resources. And additionally, with the digital divide that we have, as Tom was alluding to, when you have people who are in immigrant communities, who are refugees, who have come here, they may not actually have the internet at home. And sometimes the adults will actually be using children's materials. And for print literacy, it's really important to actually have that tactile experience. So we don't have any intention of moving our library to the all online environment. If you looked at the number of titles we've purchased just in the past week as we closed out ARPA, I think that's why we're having trouble giving you specific numbers. We could get back to you with some specifics about how much we spend in general on each of the two categories. But normally it would be more of an even split. This year it's tipped really heavily into the digital environment, but we do really see that there is continued need for print resources. And we confirmed that. Yesterday was the Vermont Library Association and Vermont School Library Association conference, and Jeanette and Tom and I attended, and there was just a lot of talk about the interlibrary loan system and how important that is to the community, and to have those physical resources for folks is still really vital for people who don't have the internet at home or who don't have a device at home that is really comfortable to read on. I know I wouldn't want to read on my phone, for example.
No, thank you. Coming in, and let's see, we have building and general services standing at the door, so we'll move on to.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. You have internet, but you also you have free COVID tests.
That's nice.
Yeah.
What interesting.
All right. Well,
That's a big book.
well, we don't use all of it. I mean, we rely on the house, page by page.
Are often large. You guys can share.
You never know what's in there.
They're so big, so.
Yeah,
You guys can
you need a big book.
Did you charge them for rates or something? Is it your district? I don't know, they're trying to sell.
Yeah, it's like this. Okay, so,
Picture is standing in my district, but looking into kitchen.
Exactly.
She did that intentionally. Royalty
Yeah.
rights for the picture.
That's just,
We're all hoping to have to change. I'm interested in the
prison.
for women.
Oh,
Is that building?
sorry, all right. Okay, well, thank you. You're on the capital bill.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
okay.
BGS,
I know, all right, so,
they're gonna build it.
Every other page.
This is about our program budgets, not about the, but I'm happy to answer any and all
not about
questions.
their capital bill, it's about their department budget. But we will use the opportunity as it presents itself. So I'm gonna have you put yourself on record first, Commissioner, and then we'll do your, but obviously, the topic has been a concern. We're getting emails about why would we, we should just all do it on the community side. And, but we also know from those of us who have been around, some of our institutions are old, or the deferred maintenance is very significant, and the quality of living in those facilities. And even though we're trying to minimize the rate of incarceration, we still will have individuals for public safety, or what the court determines needs to be placed in a facility. So what they're like, conditions, is really important. But with that, why don't we start with the department budget, and then we can move into some capital bill issues that we've been getting emails on. That all right with you, Senator?
That would be.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Jennifer Fitch, and I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Buildings and General Services. I've been there since 2017. I was the deputy, and in the last 3 years, I've been the commissioner. So I know we are short on time. Happy to answer any and all of your questions, but the really short overview is we have 11 program budgets within BGS, and really what we do is we provide services to basically function for state government. So of the 11 programs, we have the Commissioner's Office, that's myself and a few others. We have the engineering program. New for this year is general fund versus capital bill, so that's new. We have the information.
Well, we've moved that back and forth. historically.
It's new in my time, but yes, you are correct, Madam Chair. I have been told it's moved back, it's ebbed and flowed, based on economic conditions, is my understanding. We have all of the information centers / welcome centers. We do all centralized procurement, so we have the Office of Purchasing and Contracting. We have postal, fleet, print. So many of the things that you see, your journals every day, those come from our print and postal shop. The custodians and the maintenance mechanics that you see inside these buildings are BGS employees. Whenever you take out a fleet motor pool vehicle, that comes from our fleet services. We also
Do
have.
legislators use the motor pool?
I'm not sure if they have or they haven't. It's a good question. Somebody else asked me that as well. Technically, you're a state employee. So, and it's for state employee use. And I've been told you are all considered state employees.
I guess you could take one if you had to go to an out-of-state
I
conference.
mean, I've used it for.
Did I drive it to Nashville for another state conference?
There are approvals that have to take place and it wouldn't come up my chain. And then,
That was quick.
that's right, shifting.
Shut it down to the pro town.
Well, actually, I do have a Justice Center board meeting in Nashville in October. I just didn't really want to fly.
You want
I
to
didn't know I
take
could
a
use a state vehicle to get there.
Again, I think there's approvals
They'll give
involved.
you a seat.
I get it.
I sense a door being kicked wide open.
We
in the opposite.
We also have, which is great for you to know about, but we've got the federal and state surplus program. Municipalities love this program, because what happens is, when we have things we no longer have a use for at the state, we bring them
Do
to
you give out
surplus.
many gift certificates other than the one they received live?
There's all sorts of stuff. In fact, our live auction, which is like the most exciting,
Yeah, when's that?
it's in May. I can't remember. It's the day before Mother's Day. If anybody doesn't know when Mother's Day is, it's the day before that.
Early May.
Now, they-
14th of May.
For some reason, they sell that high. Well, usually they buy high and sell low, but state auction sells high.
You don't sell the vehicles. I mean, I guess you sell fleet,
Yeah,
but not
they
the, not the
All of
AOT.
the, all, even AOT, all of, everything comes through the surplus program because it's required to. But this time of the year at the live auction, there's normally like kayaks and canoes and all sorts of things. So it's a really good time of the year to
And
go.
snowplows.
And we also have property management, so that's all of our lease space. And then, of course, your favorite, you love it all the time, your fee for space program, right? Which is all of our state-owned
Right.
office buildings. So that's the 11 program budgets at large. It's up to almost $55 million this year. We're up around 7% total in terms of when you compare last year's budget to the proposed this year's budget. There's a lot of reasons for that. But primarily, when you look at fee for space, things that are driving the cost in that program are operational expenses, things we can't control, right? Gas, electric, different things that help run our buildings. And those costs are up just like they are at your own personal house. I don't know if any of your heating bills have gone up this year, but mine certainly has.
I
It's gone down.
I find that, I have to say, we find that of interest, your comments about the justification when we're, the overall budget includes areas of operating facilities and costs that actually have been level funded. So that's where we're kind of seeing some disjuncture between what is being proposed here in this state budget as opposed to other parts of the delivery system.
Right, so the challenge is, right, for when we put our budgets together, typically during lean times, we do typically level fund, but costs go up. Inflation is huge right now. In construction, we're seeing anywhere from 20 to 40% increases, right? So relate that back to buildings and operating buildings, there's things that are out of our control. We can either choose to level fund it, which means the program goes into deficit, and at some point we have to learn we have to deal with the deficit and we pay it off. If we increase rates, right, in the following year for fee for space, or do we graduate it up, which has been the choice between BGS, both finance and management, BGS and.
Well, we remember the days of large internal service deficits. Some of us have been around that long, so.
Yeah.
It's there, it's how you experience it, and I'm just talking about the difference between the expectations around what level of state governments being funded versus other parts of the service delivery system that have been outsourced from the state government. So, you have, so other areas, you've got your dashboard here that tells us everything. Obviously, you're working hard on getting the percent of, vehicles in your fleet that are EV. Senator Ash, former Senator Ash, if you're listening, please pay attention, how we're doing there.
And so the percentage on that, Madam Chair, is actually really good. The only challenge we're having right now is the same challenge you're all facing, which is we can't buy new cars. And even when we have contracts with many of the car dealers, they're not honoring those right now because they're also having their own supply challenges. And so what we're forced to do is we're forced to basically take our newer underutilized vehicles and see if anybody's willing to trade them out for older, overutilized vehicles. And so we're working within the fleet that we have, and that means some employees are shifting to using the fleet motor pool versus having a leased vehicle. So we're doing the best we can to internally manage it, while at the same time we are placing orders when we can. About half the orders that we place get canceled. And again, that's beyond our control. So we're doing the best job we can on adding fully electric and hybrids to the fleet, but we are experiencing challenges right now.
Do you have any idea what our total assets are in real property?
When you say real property, do you mean, I have a lot of assets, buildings?
Buildings and things of that nature.
Are you talking about even like state park lands and stuff as assets, or are you talking about physical?
Yeah, physical buildings,
Buildings.
like, you know, right here in town, we got, I don't know how many, 10, 20, but, you know, they're scattered around the state.
What is the State House appraised at?
It's a great question, Madam Chair, that I don't have the answer to.
Priceless.
Priceless. Oh, well, that's true.
If I had I should have brought my capital bill with me, and I didn't, because in there on the major maintenance sheet, it talks about what the value of our current buildings is, but it's a lot.
It is in
I
there.
can tell you that. And the other thing that I find that not a lot of people know is that we pay payment in lieu of taxes. And so a lot of times I go into committees and they say, we don't want state buildings in our community, or we do because we want state employees, or we don't because we're not getting the tax income. Well, the reality is that the tax department pays payment in lieu of taxes. And this year, I think we're paying $1.5 million to the city of Montpelier for payment in lieu of taxes.
Yeah, they don't give us anything. No.
But I can get you the number on,
Well,
it's in the capital bill. I
It
just don't have
depends
it
on
on
what the pilot payments look like compared to what people would be paying if it were
Well,
the standard method.
The reason I ask this is because every now and then you hear, well, we aren't utilizing our state buildings and maybe we should get rid of some of them. Well, I'd like to know what the assessed value is of those buildings so that, you know, we buy high and sell low. So when they're sold low, sold at a low price, we can ask you, what the heck's going on here? The building's worth 3 million, we ended up selling it for 1.8. How come?
So when we do have approval to sell, we get buildings appraised, and when we go to sell it, we look at what are we getting for bids as compared to the appraised value. If we're close, then we usually will accept a bid that is in compliance with the requirements. If we find that we're off, like with Redstone, which is over here, we actually had to try to put that property on the market 3 times because 2 times it has, yes, Goldman has bought it. But the first 2 times we put it out, we either didn't get anyone or the bid amount was really low. So we do try to make sure on behalf of the taxpayers that we're getting at least the appraised value or right around it, or hopefully higher. But that is the goal.
You know, it's a beautiful piece of property.
Redstone's gorgeous.
Well,
I
is it,
know.
is it
How
being
much
restored or is
I don't know
it?
what he's doing.
I can get that for you. It was a few years ago, so I don't
Oh,
remember.
yeah, it was several.
So we haven't gotten to your budget yet.
No, so I was gonna do super high level, which is just for folks, if they don't know BGS, we're a mix of internal service funds, general funds, and transportation funds. As I mentioned before, the engineering program is new this year to general funded, recognizing it goes back and forth. And the other major changes include, there was an AGO increase in their fees to our department. Originally last year, that went to the commissioner's office. Really, it should be allocated to the Office of Purchasing and Contracting because that's the group that leverages all of the services underneath that MOU.
So your total budget's just about 55 million?
That's correct, Madam Chair. So the AGO charges you'll see moved from the Commissioner's office to our purchasing program. We are embedding annual workplace.
I think they turned off the heat in here.
Yeah.
Not pay our
Would you
bill.
like me to have anything for you, Madam Chair?
Transportation was kind of cool.
I
I
think that
I
they
thought it
turned
was
up.
just me being cold, but.
Everything in air conditioning.
She's put
I spend the money.
heat up right now, she's on.
Well, maybe, I don't,
No, I agree with you.
She's texting to get the heat.
I sure am.
oh, maybe, you feel.
Is there anything else you'd like while I'm texting?
You just, you carry a bag of.
Stephanie just says, wait until tomorrow, it's gonna warm up, so let's get back to the budget.
Okay.
Have your Irish.
She's taking care of it now.
Yeah, I got it. So, and then the next one is, we have a program we're implementing right now called the Workplace Integrated Management System, but there will be annual costs for that program every year, just like there's for any other IT software. And so we're starting to embed the cost into the base of some of these programs where we have the opportunity. And then you'll see that we've moved several employees around. And the reason why we're doing that is we're aligning where they get paid and the services that they support. So a good example of that is Efficiency Vermont. Efficiency Vermont pays for up to 3 employees within BGS to do energy efficiency projects. For some reason, they put them in engineering. The money from Efficiency Vermont goes into fee for space. And so you really should align the funding mechanism with where the employee is. So that's an example of a couple of
So
employees.
it's not changing when those employees are being.
Doesn't change, it just puts them in the right bucket.
It puts them in the right bucket. So we did try to take that opportunity to put a few employees in the right bucket. And then the other big thing is we did a reclassification for our custodians and our maintenance series this past summer. And you'll see that there's a reclass that was incorporated into fee for space. Essentially, these are some of the lowest paid employees in the state of Vermont. We couldn't recruit anyone. We couldn't retain anyone. In fact, we were down to half custodians about a year ago in the complex. And as you indicated, it is a very busy place here in Montpelier. So when we were down on custodial staff, things like, carpets weren't being taken care of, other things weren't being maintained. We had some unhappy customers. So
Well, I think your people
here are amazing.
here work,
They're amazing.
yeah, they do a good job.
I'm sure they would make a point of ensuring that, to their advantage, to make sure that, we are served adequately and even better.
I don't know, they just seem to be.
No, they are, they're really great people.
All of our, this is what I would say about BGS. I used to work in transportation before I came here. Loved transportation, never thought I'd want to go anywhere else. Chris Cole brought me on this journey, was not planned. But I will tell you that the BGS employees are some of the most dedicated employees in state government. They're really passionate about the work that they do, and they want to provide outstanding customer service. So when we have situations where we're down on staff and we're not meeting the expectations of our customers, it sinks morale, sinks the boat, and it's even harder for us to recruit and retain people.
That's it, Perks, like you had your hand up.
On the information centers, is it all the information centers, even like ones, I can imagine the ones on the highways come from the transportation fund, but the one here in Montpelier, every single like kiosk comes from transportation fund?
So 134 State Street is in the information center portfolio. The only distinction on that one is that one's actually in fee for space because it's a state-owned building in the complex. The rest of them, they, through the information center program, pay all of their operations and maintenance. So it's separate and distinct from fee for space. The buildings are actually owned by the Agency of Transportation, but because we're the buildings people, we're the ones that operate and maintain.
And we cost allocate between the two agencies, based on traffic, trash and toilets.
We've had a few things.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Who should pay?
Going back to Howard Dean and flattening the one in the Northeast. Who was the legislator from up there that had the pickup, that had the outhouse on the back of it?
Bob Walker.
Bob Walker.
Yeah.
God.
Only in the
He
Northeast
got,
Kingdom.
he came down with that, and Howard Dean flattened that welcome center up by Derby about.
Derby.
So are the interstate ones the mind share ones?
So we have 16 information centers in total, and 134 is the only one really off the beaten path in terms of not being directly on interstate or major route. major highway road.
Other questions about,
I mean, I can walk you through it, each one. Page 10 through 12 in your book is the pages that I use when I usually do a crosswalk.
no, we can, not, we rely on the House to do
Okay.
that. Like, for example, you have a down of $873. We don't really want to spend too much time.
I like those small numbers.
No, if there's something really different, you've talked about just moving money around, which would explain ups and downs. Certainly we understand fee for space and internal service fund charges. So unless there's some specific question, your overall budget is, you said, was up based on your summary. Where is your summary page here?
It's up.
Was, what did you say it was?
Page 12 on the bottom
Yeah.
is the.
No, your highlights. Sorry, that's page 4. So your overall budget is up.
Correct. What percent?
4, 5.
Our total budget is up around 7%, as I indicated before, because of fee for space and all the increases that we're seeing in the market.
Fuel and utility, that's right. Construction costs, that's right. Other questions of the commissioner? No. Now's our opportunity.
I can go back and answer the women's correctional reentry if you'd like.
We should definitely do that.
Yeah, I like that.
So the current Chittenden facility, which is the only facility for women in the state, is old, it's antiquated. To your point, it needs a lot of deferred maintenance. It was really built as a detention facility. It was never meant to be a correctional facility. And over the years, what they've done, because they've become cramped, is they've modified the way that we use that space, so it no longer really functions for them. An example
It wasn't just for detention.
way back in the day, when it was
Original.
first.
Oh, I remember way back in the day.
Yep.
It was partly for detention, but partly as what most states would describe as a halfway house, where inmates could be on work release. And it was, I can't remember the exact number of beds, but it was shortly after the county sheriffs lost their jails.
That was back when Ken Stone.
Yeah, it's all Ken Stone.
Oh, yeah.
But it was not just detention, it was supposed to be for, I think it was in Burlington, it was B block.
Yeah, that was.
Well, now we've gone down ancient history, but yes, that was when we moved from the county jails to the that community correctional
I think
model.
Rutland and St. Johnsbury, the only ones left, Woodstock closed and South Burlington came to Wood, so.
Women have moved around a few times.
Well, because they used to be a Dale, we used to have them at state
They went
in
from South
Waterbury.
Burlington.
But now they're in Burlington and the facility is.
It's old and it's antiquated, it's very dark. So an example how it no longer functions anymore is they ran out of space in the dining and kitchen area. So what did they do? They took their big freezer and they stuck it down this long hallway. So now when you need to pull out any type of food, you have to, beyond what they can hold in their refrigerator in the little kitchen, you have to go all the way down the hallway, you know, to go grab the food to then bring it back. That's an example of something that doesn't flow and function well, right? Because you want everything you need to be adjacent to each other. But the other thing is that it's dark. It doesn't meet today the way that we rehabilitate people. So the main example is a great example. Same thing with mental health, lighter, brighter, more natural light, bringing in more.
That's why
of
I'm
the
not looking
setting.
out of this committee room,
Yeah.
right here, because of the natural light. It really is.
It makes a huge
It
difference.
makes a huge difference. It's the best room in this building.
My office hasn't even got a window. They don't.
No, we don't care about it.
But you share education, which has huge banquet women.
You're lucky to have a committee room.
Did you hear that shake?
I have been hearing about your committee room ever since I've been at BGS.
Well,
Now,
now,
I don't control who's in what space in the State House.
It's now his former committee.
Former committee.
Yeah,
It's his
because-
office now.
It's his office now.
The only one with an office.
No, President Pro Tem and Bobby.
Do you have a refrigerator in your office?
I don't get furnishings like this.
Well, you need to,
Ask for some. decent-
David Sheets is your person. David takes care of people over here.
Don't you have surplus furniture at the auction?
Go to the auction.
Can I
So
buy?
to the
let's go
prison,
back to the prison, please.
So the way we rehabilitate people today, right, and the way we design for that is very different than how we would have designed 30 or 40 years ago, right? Bringing in more of those neutral, natural tones. And so that's really what the intent of the proposal is right now.
I would think also areas for families to visit children, particularly.
Gender informed, trauma informed, all of those things. Yes, I think
The
actually.
question is how large.
Yeah.
To put it right to
Yeah.
the disagreement, I think.
It's a
is
size.
How big a facility should we be building? Currently, there's what, 70 women?
There's 177 beds in the facility and there's been around 110 women. Now, part of those women are not incarcerated women, right? They are in detention. So
Well, they're incarcerated.
Well, they're incarcerated, but they haven't gone through.
Right.
They haven't been found guilty
They
yet.
haven't been adjudicated, right, but, yeah.
You build it and they'll come.
Well, I think that is the concern
That's the
in terms
concern.
of what the size should
And the
be.
administration is proposing what size?
What size?
I don't know.
How many beds? So here's the thing, there's 177 beds, as I said before. If you look over the last 5 years, I think there's only been 110 or 115. So even though the beds have been there, they haven't been utilized, and that includes before the pandemic, right? I know a lot of things changed during the pandemic, but if you even look a couple of years before the pandemic, you'll see they're not filling all of those beds. The only other thing I'll say about bed count that's really important for people to understand is just like we're changing the way facilities look and feel to help better rehabilitate people, you also have to have the right environment. So if you are in an infirmary, that environment will be different than if you're in a mental health care situation, which will be different than general population. So they need to have the different types of beds to accommodate the different types of things the women need, right, in order to recover, get better, those kinds of things. And so you'll be seeing that. And the other challenge in Vermont, like I said, is there's only one facility for women. So it's not like you have the flexibility like you do for the men to potentially move them around. And in the case of the men, if there's not enough beds, then we ship them out of state. And I don't think the legislature or anybody, I don't think anybody wants to ship anybody out of state, but I don't think we want to do that to the women, just like we don't want to do it to the men. So that's the other consideration when we talk about potentially building too small. Because I think it's a shame to send anybody out of state. This is where we should keep our people.
And you
to
have
take
a
care of them.
location, or is that to be decided?
Just a second.
The location, is that to be decided?
The location has to be decided. So we are just ending the planning and programming phase. The final proposal on the number of beds has not been finalized. They're working on through that process now.
Who is the they, please?
It really comes down to the Department of Corrections. So we provide the services, but it's really their policy area. And then you also throw in the judicial branch, right? Because ultimately it's the laws that kind of create that pathway. And so there's a lot of different folks involved, but really it's the Department of Corrections who will make the final recommendation on the number of beds.
And renovating the old one, it's been ruled out.
It's funny because when I came here, I'm used to rehabilitating bridges, right? So I just thought, it's cheaper to rehabilitate every 10, right?
Oh, no.
And I came in thinking that way, and boy, was I wrong. And so Chittenden is definitely a facility where it'd be too expensive to try to rehabilitate what's already there. Again, ceilings are really low. You want higher ceilings. There's a lot, and there's no
There's
natural light in
security
that building.
problems there too. You can throw things over the fence. I'm told, I know.
Well, what's wrong with Springfield?
Springfield has men, or the men are there now.
Well, St. Albans has the bigger area. If you were going to build a current facility, then St. Albans is the place you would do, because there's no room on the property that the state owns.
And we have the.
Springfield only has, well, they don't have.
Well, what about Newberry? They don't want the kids down there, we put a prison in there.
We're going to be hearing from DCF about their plans for juvenile facilities, which is one of them in terms of a detention center, that 8 bed. So we're going to be hearing from them this week.
don't know why you brought that
Why
up.
would you say
I think
that?
you were channeling you. Oh, so.
I was thinking the same thing, but you said it out loud.
Well,
All right,
say
I
what
want to
you
go back,
think.
please. We're getting close. Department of Labor is waiting outside. So the number of beds yet to be determined.
That's correct, Madam Chair.
So exactly what that would be, the concern is if you make it too big, you'll lose all the space and people would be unnecessarily inappropriately incarcerated. I don't know if the judiciary says you're gonna be incarcerated based on the number of beds, but that seems to be what people are connecting. I would think they probably make decisions based on the law.
If I were making the decision about myself, I would build a small facility and I would consider, if it ever came down to it, is some of the really long-term, there's probably 10 to 12 of them, women who are in for serious murders. We're gonna be there the rest of their lives. I would look at that group as possibly elsewhere if you needed more space.
Means of a high security.
Yeah, really high security need, and I would certainly have minimal security for many of the women. That's the model in Maine and actually in New York State. I think it's Rikers Island where they're trying to build a new women's, or they built a new women's facility to try to replace Rikers Island.
And Senator, thank you. We are proposing to build reentry as part of that, which is that Maine model, and I've gone up and seen it twice. I love Maine. I love their reentry facility. It's amazing. Again, lighter, brighter, higher ceilings. Women can go out during the day. They work. They have, yes, many services, programming. They have a chef right on site.
I don't
that is
know,
known in
I
Maine.
don't think there's more than 20 women who need real maximum security, high security, who have been convicted of very serious crimes. And obviously, some of the detentioners may also be accused of very serious crimes.
Well, I guess there's any more questions on that? I'm just looking.
No, it
I don't
helps
wanna-
because,
Well, we all have those emails to respond to.
right, but it's also,
Understanding what's being proposed in the policy.
Yeah.
And also, making sure that we're using sort of the best models of supporting reentry and the physical space, and physical space certainly has a big impact on behaviors and so forth. So, all right, we will probably have more discussion. Otherwise, we're going to move on to Department of Labor.
Thank you. And just one more plug for this in case no one's plugged it yet, but this is our demystifying internal service funds. We did this a few years ago. We update it annually.
I thought I read it first. I thought it was internal. IRS.
No, IRS was tax time, right?
Uh-huh.
But this is a great document to look at as well.
Well, that's why we really rely on you to make it cost effective and well, because all the costs get redistributed and paid for throughout state government. So people want it, and then when they get the bill, are surprised by the charge.
And remember, fee for space is given to departments, so I know they don't want to necessarily acknowledge that, but it's given to them in the budgeting process. Thank you. Have a great day.
We do know that. Okay, so it's Department of Labor.
They're here. Yep.
Oh, are they remote or in person? Okay.
my hearing changed. Oh, no. I thought you grew a beard.
in a ponytail in a couple of weeks. Incognito. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Pretty much. Seems like Matt's coming along well.
Hi, sorry.
Yeah, he's doing well. So everything's going according to plan, which I guess
He
is
and I both got heads.
solidarity
Mine was a
amongst
little
brothers, right?
different. Mine was skin cancer, but this,
Are you doing okay?
yeah, just a little painful.
Yeah.
Especially from the center kitchen.
I thought maybe that's because you were sitting on her right side, like that's just the.
I've been known to.
Well, She hopefully now will just kick me under the table.
I do that too. I do that too.
That I don't mind.
Wait till his foot is in a cast, right?
I know. So we're going to move on to Department of Labor, and we have just about a half hour to go through the budget. We do have your budget development form, and so why don't we put you on record and you introduce the staff that you brought with you today, so we'll get right into your overview, and then want to hear also a bit more about your UI modernization and how things are going and sort of what are going to be your priorities and areas of emphasis and challenges as we look into fiscal year 24.
Great. For the record, Michael Harrington, Commissioner, Department of Labor. Thank you. Happy to be back before this committee. I think we've always had a really great working relationship with this committee. To my right is Chad Wozniak, our CFO at the Department of Labor. Many of you are probably very familiar with Chad. He's been with us for a long time. And then to my left is Cameron Wood, who for many years served as our unemployment insurance director, recently has added to that role and now serves also during the session as our legislative liaison.
Well, he's heard from many of us over
Yes, so I think you're all on a first name basis with Cameron. So there's a lot to cover if we want to in a short amount of time. So maybe what I'll do is just move through what you have before you is the presentation. It says FY24 budget presentation. It has a photo of the department on the second page. It has our department structure. I'm just kind of moving through some of the less significant items. But in general, the department has seen its shift in recent years.
I know the federal funding has declined.
It's declined, and the cost of the work, especially following the pandemic, has increased. And so, what this also looks at is other dollars that were put in for workforce development and unemployment insurance following the pandemic, and that's why the percentages have shifted so significantly. Other than that, the overview for the most part stays the same. We'll get into a couple of the little ups and downs we have, but in general, the total budget is around 62 million, give or take some grants that we have in there. The rest of the presentation really goes division by division. And so we may want to get into this when we drill down a little bit more, but unemployment insurance, which roughly has anywhere from 70 to 90 staff, depending, was as high as 120, I think, during the pandemic, not including contracted staff. And those various funding sources have changed just over the past year or two. Again, with more state dollars or a variation of dollars coming in as opposed to just our general federal allocation we get every year. Workers' compensation also includes our safety division. So the department oversees in its workers' compensation division, essentially the mediation of workers' comp claims that are contested among the injured employee, the employer, and the insurance provider. We don't actually administer a workers' compensation benefit. And also with that is our safety programs, which are Vermont's Occupational Safety and Health Administration, VOSHA, which is a state plan that is aligned with federal OSHA. Our Project WorkSafe, which is an educational and outreach tool we have in our safety division, and our passenger tramway division, which is the group that inspects all the chairlifts and conveyance methods up and down the ski mountains.
How did that end up with, well, I guess it's basic safety, I guess it falls, but
yeah.
But there are other inspection functions that are in different departments.
Yeah, and I don't know the whole history about it, but there is a passenger tramway board of 5 members.
We have the racing commission, right?
I want to be appointed.
Yeah, right.
And the you don't get free tickets, just so you know. But the
on the tram.
Create a free ticket.
Yes. It's we have 2 2 inspectors, 1 supervisor who's also an inspector of the program. The board sets the fee that the mountains pay to the state to cover the cost.
Does that include the zip lines?
It does, but it's only the conveyance of people up and down the
Not the
mountain.
zip line deck, because we had that one accident on the zip line.
Right, and that was inspected by VOSHA, and we did do some inspection under the tramway program, but it's really the actual conveyance up and down the mountain, not the ride itself. We also have our labor market information division, which is one of our smaller divisions. They align with the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and our workforce development division, which is one of our largest divisions. And we're roughly around 75 individuals, most of whom work in the field. So we have 5 regions, roughly 12, I'll say offices or areas, teams, because some of our teams work in communities at various sites as opposed to in a physical office. We had 2 very small offices that have been harder to reopen following the pandemic because for safety reasons, we try to make sure there are 2 people in an office at any given time. And with either staffing shortages or people out on occasional leave, it keeps it harder to keep those offices open.
So why, on the federal UI, it just seems like the support for that program has declined. And I noticed that you've got a down of almost 800,000 just for UI administration.
Yeah, so
that seems to be an area that, used to be a lot more federal dollars going in to support that program.
The actual, and Cameron, jump in here if I'm off, but for the most part, there hasn't been a significant decrease in the amount of federal dollars per se. So every year, the state submits a cost allocation plan or what they call the RJN, which is the resource justification model, which looks at the prior year's work, and that's how they determine the current year's funding. So it's a little backwards because you're never actually current for what the current demand of the program is. But our federal funding has roughly been anywhere between 6.5 million and 7.5 million, give or take. This past year, the current year we're in, which is the federal year, started in October, we saw a decrease of 10% in our operating budget after the year started. So we lost about $700,000 out of our budget for UI. But the cost to operate the program has increased because of the increase in federal programs, the increased technology and functions we've had to perform to administer. We used to, only administer 1 program, and that is the traditional unemployment insurance. And at one point during the program, the past few years, we were issuing checks out of, I think, 7 different programs, 5 or 7 different programs. So it became infinitely more complex with, again, a lot more need for technology, for fraud detection and mitigation, for accessing information online through technology. So again, the cost of the program, in addition to the workload, has increased. There are different pots of federal money that seem to come our way sporadically. But the base amount for general operations stayed roughly around $6.5 to $7 million.
But you do have a new system
coming. So the legislature, in its wisdom, and thank you very much, saw the importance of upgrading our system, and we have a little over $30 million set aside for our program. We're going through the procurement process right now. We've identified what we believe to be our top vendor and are about to kick off contract negotiations.
Have you announced your vendor yet?
We haven't, only at the direction of contracting and purchasing,
Sure.
that we should have a contract in place before we announce. But I can tell you that the 3 finalists were companies that had proven solutions. So we're not doing a one-off or somebody who had, a company that hasn't.
I don't think AES would even approve anything like that anymore.
Yeah.
Based on past failures.
So, I think we'll there were definitely two that stood out amongst the three. And I think the one we're hopefully going with, if we can get to a signed contract, will be the best option for us.
So over time, when would the old system be replaced?
So
Is it
if
3 years?
they're able to be as aggressive as they claim to be, the vendor says that they can do essentially the program, and there are two core functions that happen in the program. One is the tax side, so the contributions that employers pay into the system on behalf of their employees, which also gives us all the wage data for the employees, and then the benefit side. So when someone files, we cross-check that against the wages they have in the system, and when we pay benefits, they come out of the trust fund. So they believe that they can do each component, the tax and then the benefits, in about a year's time. So again, I think we're looking at, from today's date, probably 2.5 to 3 years, given when the contract is signed, when we kick things off. Best case scenario is the moment we get the contract signed and we can jump in, 2 years. But I think just knowing how technology
So who's
goes.
your project manager team, because that's really critical.
Yeah, so right now we've got a PM, a project manager out of ADS, and we have a portfolio manager who's, I think, one of the best in terms of the ADS team. So I think the ADS team and our team really see the importance around this. So
And who's going to have your team?
so we have two individuals. One is an associate director of unemployment insurance. Her name's Christine Murphy. She probably has the most working knowledge of the system, the current system and structure of the program. She's held just about every position over time, for everything from a customer service representative to a tax chief, and now as an associate director. Yeah, 15 to 17 years she's been with us. And then we also hired, I'm going to mess up the exact title, but essentially it's a business application manager. She will be the project lead from the business side. Her name's Sanchita Banerjee. She actually has worked with the department for the past 7 years as a contractor. On UI modernization. So she's probably the most knowledgeable about UI modernization.
She there for that multi-state development.
She was, but she was she was the third-party contractor we had that was through a vendor called MathTech, which provided project management services. She wasn't on the development team. So she's actually applied for and been hired with the department, and she'll be leading the project from the operations side.
Real quick on that, I was just going to say, Sanchita, has been a business analyst with the department, as the commissioner mentioned, a contractor, but she's been doing business analyst work for us for close to 10 years. And so she probably knows our department UI processes better than even some of our new managers that we have on board. So we're really fortunate to have her wanting to come on as a state employee.
So I was wondering, you have, I presume you have to have space for the new system separate from the old system so that you can still run the old system. So do you have that adequate space at the?
We will need space. Yeah, so we will need space for the development team. So if this vendor does this modernization project like they've done others, they will probably have an in-state team. So we'll need space during the development work where they'll be working with our subject matter experts to build the system, but it is all cloud-based. So it'll either be hosted through our cloud-based hosting vendor, which, for those who don't know, our current mainframe system is actually housed off-site through a vendor location. So it's no longer at the department. I don't know if the new system will be housed in our third-party off-site spot or through the company. So
I was wondering how technology has changed the whole labor market exchange function, which came back. I mean, we're talking about the UI side, but combined with that is the old and with Indeed and so much being online, and the way in which employers now advertise and so forth. How has that influenced the way in which you are managing your labor market, labor exchange function?
So the functions themselves are relatively the same. For those who don't know, we operate, as the chair was mentioning, a labor exchange, which is it's called Vermont Job Link. You may have heard of it. It's a place where employers can create an account and post jobs. It's a place where job seekers can post resumes and apply for jobs. It's gone through its ups and downs. It's actually one of the modernization projects we currently have in flight right now. It does more than just the linking of job seekers with employers. It does all of our case management work and all of our federal reporting work as well. It's predominantly funded and authorized through the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA. To your point, we're able to provide a lot more service, direct service to our customers through virtual technology. So we don't always have to be in a physical location in a building. Our team can be remote or on the road. We can be linking with those who are comfortable using technology virtually. A lot of employers it allows us to also offer things like job fairs remotely. So we still have on-site or in-person job fairs, but we also offer a handful of virtual job fairs. So that's been beneficial too. So folks can, again, essentially look at what jobs are available and potentially apply from the comfort of their own home and not needing to drive around the state looking for jobs. But our job board, because of a number of different partnerships we have, saw a very big increase in the number of jobs being posted during the pandemic. So for anybody who knows, JobLink has been somewhat probably a troubled child in the past. It's going to be somewhat clunky for employers. It's hard for our staff to use. It's part of the reason we're upgrading it. Back in 2017, there was a data breach with it. So there were challenges there. So I think we're really excited for the upgrade. But through partnerships, we've been able to have other jobs get posted from other sites into our system. So we saw a vast increase, upwards of about 20,000 jobs being posted at any given time during the pandemic in JobLink. I think we're down to the last number I think I remember is like 8,000, maybe even less, which again is hopefully a good sign that jobs are being filled. But yeah, technology has kind of changed the way we do business.
Other questions? Well, hopefully things are smoothed out. I know the implementation of all those UI changes and the workload is crushing, but you've obviously survived it. Are you finding that on the whole, that with this low rate of unemployment, one thing that's so different than what it was when everything shut down with the pandemic?
Yes and no, and that's because while the number of claims may be coming through the door, there were a lot of changes we made to our system in order to fit the square peg in the round hole, if you will, to make it work for the pandemic. That someone once described it as we want to let the genie out of the bottle, and there's no putting the genie back. And so there are a lot more manual processes being performed right now because we had to make changes to our mainframe system. And the ancillary systems we have. So, and at the moment, we're doing an exorbitant amount of auditing and monitoring from the federal government. We have, whether it's through the Office of Inspector General, through the state's auditing practices, or through the U.S. Department of Labor, we're operating probably 3 audits at any given time. So the demand on the staff has not subsided, but the number of staff seems to be a challenge as well, trying to fill positions, which,
well, there's been a lot of concern nationally around the fraud with UI as it stood up so quickly.
Yes.
I know that probably we aren't immune from that, I'm sure.
No, and although I would say Vermont fared very well compared to what we know other states went through with our fraud issues, and some of that was I'll call it dumb luck. For instance, a lot of states saw a lot of fraud with their debit card systems. So they were loading a lot of money on debit cards that would then go to fraudulent filers. And they may have been, so what they're finding is they have a lot of trust fund dollars that are sitting out there on debit cards that either got used or haven't been used, right? So then it's how do you get the money back after it's been deposited on a debit card? Even if the fraudster never received a debit card. We actually stopped our debit card project right as we were heading into the pandemic because of the pandemic. So we only issued payments through electronic fund transfer or through paper check. So that was a blessing in disguise. I think the other thing is that for good or for bad, and it can't be this way forever, but when one of the things we did right out of so leading up to the pandemic, you had to call the department to file and open a claim. You couldn't do it online. When we launched into the pandemic, we immediately put the application online so we could start receiving electronic applications. It was the only way to keep up with the volume. But what we saw is as the volume subsided, but we saw a lot of fraud coming through, our ability to actually take the form offline and force people to have to call. Essentially, we went from, at one point, we were seeing 3,000 claims a day to, a matter of a few hundred a day. I mean, it cut the number of claims by 90% as soon as we took the form offline and made people call our call center. The problem with that is at the time we were still using vendors for our call system, and the quality that people were experiencing was low. So I'm happy to say that we were able to take over the initial claims calls back in-house, and I think within the next 2 months we'll be able to take over the rest of the calls back in-house. It's a challenge running a call center, but we also find that our state staff can do it faster and better and provide better service to people, and people are happier when they can talk to somebody who understands what they're going through. So, but again, we're still seeing high call volume, but I think there are a couple different things that play into that right now. And our lack of staff have really caused some bottlenecks in different areas, which is stuff we're working through at the moment.
Other comments?
So I just wanted to make a comment that I think Cameron, I don't know how many times we had conversations over during the pandemic. It was always a pleasure working with you and the constituents. So we're very pleased with the way you handle things. So thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. The thanks really goes to our staff who have done a Herculean effort over the past few years to try to get through all the claims. And I appreciate that, Senator, and I will pass that along to them as well.
Yeah.
It was, we forgot how really everything just shut down. It was.
Oh, they were unlikely swamped.
All right. Are you gonna be?
I'll be back after
You
that.
are. All right. I didn't know whether you were
No, I
needing to.
wanted to meet with them because I didn't think they had time to get back next week.
All right, that's fine. Any other questions from the department? That's fine.
I think the only thing we would add for the record, it's not specific to our proposed budget, but in the big bill, there's a specific section in there that I just want people to make sure they're aware of. So last session, the legislature authorized $1.5 million over 2 years to the department to create what was called a workforce expansion pilot. In section F.1, what in the current bill, what it's proposing to do is essentially rescind or take back some of that funding and reappropriate it to the department for other items. So I just, again, want to go on the record to say that, our position would be that that money remain for the workforce expansion program. Essentially, it proposes to take back 1.5 million or 1.2 million of the money that was originally appropriated and
Did that come out
redistributed.
of the Commerce Committee?
No, I don't know where it came out of, but it's in the big bill under F.1.
I'm not sure if it was Commerce that decided to repurpose the money or whether that came from the Appropriations Committee. This was not part of the workforce development bill that they were working through that got incorporated later. These are two, one-time funding requests that the department has that I know Commerce was supportive of, but the determination to repurpose, I think, may have come from Appropriations.
Okay. And what you would say is you want them for their original purpose, then for working.
Yeah, so again, there was last year, the workforce expansion. This year, there was money that was asked for and the governor's recommend for the New American Labor Force Program of $200,000 and $1 million of general fund to provide work-based learning. So essentially whether it was appropriations, I believe is probably where it came out of. It took back the 1.2 of what was appropriated last year and to use to fund those two other recommends from this year. And I think, our position would be that we'd obviously like to see the program from last year remain funded and these two initiatives from this year.
That would take
funded.
additional money.
Yeah, but it would take additional money.
So what they
Yeah,
did was
Mr. Chairman.
repurpose and have you do something new.
Yeah, and we can certainly send you a note so you've got it.
I think that would be helpful.
Any other questions from folks?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Senator Sears had to go meet with judiciary. He'll be back. So, thank you.
Thank you all. Very much appreciate it.
So we're moving on now to the Agency of Transportation. And
They only need 15 minutes.
what about liquor and lottery?
Even less.
Even less?
Thank you.
Moving right along.
Well, Miles getting on.
So we're moving on to the Agency of Transportation, and we have with us Secretary Schmidt and Bradley Converter. You're the CFO, is that your correct title?
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam
And
Chair.
then I see there's Michelle Power. Okay. All familiar faces to at least two of us on the committee. We are going to just do a high-level overview. I realize you've got a lot more slides here. If we break down a bit more detail on the different areas of funding. I think the IIJA match is certainly of interest to us in terms of what's being proposed. So I'm going to let you do the budget overview, and then we can get into maybe specific areas, and if people have questions. I think what's perhaps different and obviously was impacted in the House, and that's what they did for match, and also the level of general fund that was proposed in the governor's budget, which I'm sure you're here to defend. So why don't you?
Thank you very much.
get started?
For the record, Joe Flynn, Secretary of the Agency of Transportation. If you look at slide 2 on the PowerPoint, we're here to discuss the 24 as recommended governor's budget of $858,277,271. That represents a 2.4% increase over last year. On the next page, we talk about where the funding summary comes from. And of course, as you cited, Senator Kitchell, this budget is built without any taxes or fees. It is resulting from the 2JA. We are looking for $10.9 million to help with match above what revenue forecasts will indicate for this coming fiscal year. And obviously, the ups are because of the appropriations coming from the bipartisan infrastructure law. The pressures are on the next page. Of course, every year, as you know, salaries and benefits go up. statewide allocations for fees go up. We do have formula increases for town programs and our central garage equipment fund and BGS information centers. We do have an initiative in DMV, so there's 3 million in here for e-permitting. And as I mentioned, the $10.9 million additional match money necessary for the tranche of federal money in fiscal 24. The next page really simply shows the budget history. Moving on to slide 6. This is a slide that simply shows where the sources of funding are coming from, with the greatest always being the Federal Highway Administration. And second is the funding that comes through DMV and state transportation. The next slide shows disbursement of those funds. I won't go through each slice of the pie, but state paving is the single largest area. While the paving program has been reduced somewhat since last year's budget, it is still the largest piece of this budget. And this is the 9th consecutive year that paving has been over $100 million, which we think is incredibly important. Obviously, the budget speaks to the economy. It puts a lot of people to work through the programs, through the contract community. It's also an increase of nearly 10% in the investment in Vermont towns. We put in almost $9 million more into town programs in this budget. It covers all of our work in rail, a significant improvement, increase, I should say, in aviation, a commitment ongoing to EV incentive programs and EV infrastructure, paving across 12 of Vermont's 14 counties, and bicycle and pedestrian programs across 11 counties. There's an awful lot more to go into in each of these, but I'm just being sensitive to the time.
One of the, and I don't know whether there's a slide that shows it per se, but going back to your funding summary, you know that the governor says no fee increases, and the House did put in some fee increases. There is in statute a requirement that we're supposed to be updating fees every on a predictable schedule. And you're, what we have proposed here is using redirected general fund to serve as the match for your FHWA, 80-20 match, and then a requested pot of money to be available to serve as the federal, for the state match, to make sure we leverage all the IIJA. So that, if we look at that, obviously, long-term, we're using one-time money here when you've got a structural deficit, just to draw down your normal federal funds. And we know that certainly not updating the fees has been a contributor to that. You don't need to comment on it because I know what the governor's position on it. But that only deals with it short-term for 3 years. That's, I just want to make sure that I fully understand your what the governor is proposing. And 3 years, someone else can inherit this, right?
Yeah, all your observations are spot on. The as recommended budget is recommending money be parked for the remaining match necessary for fiscal 24, fiscal 25, and fiscal 26, which are the remaining years of the 2JA funding tranche under this current 5-year reauthorization. We don't know what beyond 5 years looks like with the next reauthorization, but it certainly seems to be the case that we should not be expecting the type of investment that this administration, meaning in Washington, has put into investments for infrastructure currently. It just isn't something that anybody seems to think will continue. And that's not a criticism of what we're getting today. It just doesn't seem likely. So again, none of us can predict where we're going to be in 4 years, fiscal 27, but it does appear, we believe that the pressures on the difference between the match that can be raised organically through revenue forecasts and the match that'll be necessary for whatever that funding reauthorization looks like then will be less of a delta, less pressure than it is today. And, you know, it would be more than difficult to try to plan for 27. I think really then we're already trying to plan for 24, 25, and 26.
We are talking about $10.1 million, so, right?
For 24, correct.
That we would have to take out of general.
Correct. That's the way the budget.
And
was structured.
That's how
money
the
set
government-
aside,
A plus one.
Correct.
and money set aside
Right.
to go up 2 years beyond it.
So it totals out to, what was it?
Just under 80 million
Yeah,
for the 3
80
years.
million of general fund. And so that's, I know that certainly one of the priorities of the administration is to make sure the match is there. And it's certainly, even if we go forward with the fee increases,
Right.
more money is gonna have to, in fact, it's gonna take more money than could be supported just through the transportation fund.
What is the 2JA money? How much does it add up to if we put a 11 million match in? So what do we?
That's a great question, and basically, revenue forecasts across 24, 25, and 26 are indicating that, well, this is,
Yeah, if I may,
this is just pretty small.
for the record, Bradley Kuchenberger, CFO for AOC.
I know.
Senator Starr, to your question, the $79 million of general fund proposed for FY 24, 25, and 26 in the governor's recommended budget would bring down about $341 million of federal funds.
340?
Yeah, for a total project value of 420, approximately.
So it's almost 50%.
It'll be more than that. I think, what's the standard match on
Well, I thought I had it in my head that was closer to 75, but run those numbers
I think
through
it should
one
be,
more time.
isn't it, the same as it the 80-20?
It's approximately close to it, but I'll give you the exact
Well,
amount.
it might be higher than that if you're spending on years.
Is it?
90%.
It's 90-10.
So it's 18.
Well, I don't know whether IIJA
approximately-
carries a differential match though.
So it'd be approximately 18.8% match rate is the way we filter it through.
So that 2JA money, is there any way that can be sort of refunneled? Is it very strict usage of that money?
Yeah,
It is.
There's also another connection in another part of the budget, and that has to do with water and sewer infrastructure. And so there's a required match as well for those federal dollars to be drawn down. So it's not only the transportation infrastructure, but it's also that kind of water, sewer, yeah, ANR, yeah. So Senator Weston.
Well, go ahead now.
Oh, you don't, no question yet? Okay. Did you have a comment, Michelle? No. Or are you just trying to fade into the woodwork there? Okay.
Here to be supportive. From the side.
All right. And then,
I
Other
have another
questions?
question, but I want you to get through your budget stuff first.
well, I think, otherwise we're going into the various components of the overall plan. Now, there's two parts, obviously, and that is the T-bill is just the plan.
Right.
The money to fund the plan has to be in the budget. And so that's gonna come down to the revenues and how we allocate. I know that, we spent a lot of time on the JTOC transfer, and right now, we, compared to many years ago, there's only one transfer, and that's to public safety. And I think probably Vermont has a different model. New Hampshire actually does their highway law enforcement through the DMV, and they fund it. And I don't know what their total cost of highway enforcement is. We only do the commercial vehicles through DMV.
Still, the whole state police is running.
So, we talk about the JTOC transfer, but in reality, that may be a more cost-effective way to partner with our public safety than doing the other model and have DMV responsible for all highway law enforcement. But that's kind of just an interesting how different states are approaching the highway laws.
Their commercial vehicle enforcement is what they call Troop G, I believe, which is part of the New Hampshire State Police. But we're not advocating that. I mean, that's a whole other conversation.
No. Okay, and so the rest, I mean, are just a breakdown.
It is.
There was some concern, and we're taking testimony in terms of what the House made for changes.
Right.
And probably won't have to do a number of them, or at least one of them, that was reducing maintenance by $1 million and finding a different way of funding. We talked about that this morning.
Right.
Maintenance is always where anybody who wants to do something goes, because that's all state funds and therefore it has the greatest flexibility. So that was the one area that the House changed, reduced that by $1 million to fund fare-free public transit in Chittenden County because they needed to get fare boxes and get the system in place to go back to fares. So that we'll see some change here by the time the bill comes.
If I may point out one other just area, it's on slide 38 of your, it's just one time. There is a $3 million request for connectivity grants regarding the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail to get people that are recreating on the trail, off the trail, into the communities as it goes through communities, to get people in the communities, perhaps especially visitors that may not be familiar, directed toward the trail. And there's also a $3.5 million capital request in institutions to partially pay. We have the rest of the money, but to construct a new facility for District 8, which is up in Franklin County. Those are unusual to the typical bills, so I just read a typical presentation. That's why I just wanted to point that out.
And they both represent general fund allocation,
Right.
what the government is proposing. But we're hoping that maybe the rail trail, in fact, could qualify for federal funding, and so the state share would be substantially less than what's being proposed here. But Michelle is right on it, I want to assure you, because we talked about that last week.
If I could just say, with respect to the facility, in 2017, the budget was pretty much baked when we arrived. And there was an intended investment in the current facility, which I paused, because I really wanted to ask that we take a look at other locations. You know, we have about a 9-acre facility there. It's got disparate buildings on the campus. Some of the vehicles weren't fitting it anymore. We had pieces of the ceiling that were coming down. It needed to be worked on, but I wasn't convinced, and others weren't convinced, that investing more money in that location was the best idea. And we've purchased land, which is much closer. It's within a quarter mile of Interstate Exit 21. The other facility is 2.7 miles, and if you saw the video of getting our trucks in and out of where it is to go through town in St. Albans City. You know, so we held off. We didn't invest nearly $1 million in 2017 just to upgrade that facility. And we've gotten by. We've done a couple of things to get us past, but you know, the agency really needs to look to the future for a different facility in Franklin County.
You can't use federal funds for that.
Pardon me?
You can't use federal funds for mankind maintenance, leaving the building.
So there's no facilities in that area that you can purchase, and they're already built.
Not really. I mean, we didn't, that didn't come to mind. I mean, you know, in order to have a facility with a number of garage bays like that, it would almost need to be a defunct car dealership or something, and there's really nothing
And
up
even
there.
then, you can't put a truck in a
Right.
plow, I would
Yeah.
think.
And
It's a very costly time to build anything. like
Understood.
And I mean, we built a new shop just before the pandemic. And the contractor told us that the price of now would be double. Well, So if you build anything right now, you're gonna pay twice as much as you would have 3 or 4 years ago.
We do have, I believe it's the probability as opposed to possibility of the heating system being covered through federal funds and the solar array. The concept up there is this would be a net zero building. It would be solar and chips for backup or pellets. And we've heard through Senator Sanders' office that the cost of basically the HVAC system would be something that they believe that they could fund, which would reduce the overall construction cost somewhat. But your point certainly is we see this constantly in bids today. So your point is.
I don't think labor's going to come down. Once those higher wages have gone in, they're not going to be rolled back. So maybe materials will see some reduction, but the labor costs, I don't think will change.
So,
But don't forget, whether the money comes from here or comes from Washington, still people's money.
totally understand.
You know,
It really was a situation of, also questioning the investment of significant dollars, upwards of $1 million in the current facility, which
oh,
you
but you don't
just,
throw good money
right.
at that.
That was where this started.
You get along with what you got until you can afford to do what you want to do.
Unless your road's leaking, I guess.
That's the way it
So,
is.
personally.
The estimated TIP fund increase, that is just because of, I'm sort of looking at this, I'm assuming that is just because of increased gas prices.
That's diesel as well.
Yeah, so there's 2 factors to that. There's one is the TIP revenues are a function of fuel prices. So as prices go up this past year, we saw the actual fuel, gas and diesel tax go down, but the TIP portions of that go up because they're a percentage basis. And we also paid down all of our TIP bonded debt. So we don't have to pay the roughly $2.5 million of debt service. So that
We did that
contributes,
last year. We paid it
and so that contributes to our ability to use it on pay bill projects.
And then I had another question on the estimated state fund match available, having a decrease each year going out for the next 2 years.
And that aligns with the economist forecast, both the legislature's economist and the administration's economist. Yes.
And that also takes into account some assumptions of our general operating costs increasing on a regular basis.
Less money available.
Yeah, right.
Senator Western? No?
Just, TIPS
TIPS is
is on the
phasing.
wholesale price.
Yeah.
Well, based on a trailing 3 quarters or.
I realize that, the additional state revenues that have flowed in are wonderful. And obviously, we're sitting here with a list of 400 to 500 million of requests over and above the governor. And we did pay off the TIP, and part of that was to position ourselves for the potential of that. If we didn't have this big time limited higher revenues, that we would use the TIP funding mechanism to help finance the state match.
The problem with that is with higher interest rates, TIP becomes less valuable.
I understand that, but last year when we paid it off,
No,
that was the logic.
I totally get that.
Because we did that here, to pay the, so we cleaned it out and saved us on debt service and, but at that point it was to help position ourselves for the potential federal dollars from the center, from the IIJA. So other comments? Well, anyway, maintenance must be good this year because we haven't had too awful.
Yeah, we were doing quite well up until about 4 weeks ago, and these last series of storms, a week ago, it was about a $2.5 million storm.
In the south?
Yeah, well, statewide, but yeah, we had places.
Is that when Brattleboro had 2 or 3
snow.
feet or something?
Right.
Okay.
We've used less salt but the salt we're using costs more. So that's what's, affecting the budget.
Yes,
That
Senator
brings
Webb.
up the, how much bonded indebtedness do we have in the rest of transportation? It's not, not.
No.
Everything's paid off. They're debt-free.
I was
Yeah.
wondering about the 2.3 million for parking right. We don't charge anybody anything to park there, right?
Right.
And then do we still give them a free ride when they get on the bus to Montpelier or wherever?
Depends on where you live, Senator Starr,
Depends on
but
where you
right
live,
now
right.
it's free, but it won't be if you live in Burlington.
Pardon? And
If you're served by GMT, which is out of Burlington, they will be reinstituting fares on their urban routes.
Well, I was gonna say, I saw one of them in Stowe this morning,
Oh, well,
and they should be having to pay. I mean,
well, actually, the C areas do help fund, just like the medical center and UVM help fund that transportation service for that very reason. Besides, parking is such a premium, they love to minimize.
I just think that if you wanna use a parking ride, you should have to buy a little sticker for a certain amount. And if you
I don't know if that's even permissible with the federal funding. We can't do tolls.
no, we aren't gonna do tolls, but
Well, no,
I
I meant
mean-
in terms of charging, if you have used federal dollars to finance the project.
I mean, you've got a lot of people that are living in Burlington, Chittenden County, I know for a fact. And they travel to Montpelier to work. Well, that's their choice of where they want to live, but from the
If they can
Northeast
find housing.
Kingdom, if I live in Troy and I want to ride the bus to Montpelier.
Then you can come to St. Jay and ride it. St. Jay to
Well,
Montpelier.
Well,
Is a
hell,
route to
it's
connect.
closer to drive to Montpelier than it is to St. Jay, so.
I know that, I'm telling you, there's a Route 2 commuter, but there isn't one from Newport to
Oh,
Montpelier.
heaven, no, we're lucky if you could find a horse to
Well, that's
ride.
because there's nobody up there.
Yeah.
Except
I
except
mean,
the stars.
It's not very equitable, distribution of money, and the people in Chittenden County, if you look at the charts, earn more money than the people in Orleans County. and
That's
yet-
why public transit is free in the rural areas of the state.
Well, it's free out of the richest
No,
part of
it's
the
not only,
state.
no, it's not going to be.
Well, it has been.
It has
It was
because of the
during the
federal funding,
pandemic.
but it's coming back, and that's been part of the
I
issue.
hope so.
So it's coming back.
But we gotta find $10 million to cover his costs.
Well, the House is proposing by updating the fees. Simple as
His
that.
match fund, and,
Excuse me,
That-
Bobby, it's 80.
The House found
80
it.
million.
oh, they found the 10.
Well, they did because they did an update on the fees, and that hasn't,
Oh, yeah.
so.
It's not, it's not 10, it's
Not
80.
now though, right? Or it will.
Well, that's for next year.
Well, it's 3 years.
Yeah, it's 78 rounded up to 80 total. That's what we're talking about, million. Yes,
It is the highway bridge in for locals, is that up because they've got more projects? Is it up because there's more construction? Or are we doing more because of, are they eligible for IIJA and we've got more there? Is that,
Those programs typically follow available projects, ups or downs.
well, there's available projects and then there's always a backup in the lineup for
Well-
the federal funds that are eligible. So is it a combination of all of those? Is it, what's the
it
increase?
says it will be 100% federal participation thanks to IIJA, so that's on page 34.
Yeah, I was looking at that.
Well, Town Highway Bridge, 37.2.
There's a new program, and if I may, under IIJA, there's a brand new program,
Okay,
and it's $225 million. And a minimum of, and that's to Vermont over 5 years, and a minimum, I believe, of 15 million has to be set aside for projects at the local level for historic bridges, primarily aimed at covered bridges or the
Do you
historic
have any
iron
covered
trust.
bridges?
And those are 100% funded.
Sure fits.
I got a whole bunch.
I've got a whole bunch of them. I must have.
And, does that answer your question about?
Yeah,
this?
it does say it's 100% federal.
My biggest problem
Extra
is the
6.9.
DPS and trucks over there.
I need to
Bridges
ask
that
you,
don't fit.
one of the things that on my list is the agency had proposed taking off the project list because it's not gonna happen. The third lane of the Bennington bypass.
I was
Now,
alerted to that.
and a certain House member from that area said it should stay on. And I was commissioned to ask you, concur with the agency to remove it?
I agree with the House member. Patty.
Oh, Kel's agrees, huh?
However,
It wasn't your fellow senator. It's a hell
I
of a-
understand that, but he's,
There's your answer.
you know, it's,
You've already got 2 out of 3. That ain't bad. Remember, Senator?
that's true,
Sears?
but remember the conversation about Racine bypassing?
Yeah.
That was what it was about.
The third leg or just the other
Yeah, I
2?
mean, I'm used to being on the losing end of some things in this world.
You win most of the time.
We send more money to that little corner of the state.
When did you ever lose anything?
Oh, time and time again, Bob.
He's the
Can't you-
forgotten
he
kingdom.
said he's tired lugging all that stuff home for you.
Oh,
I don't,
You would,
I don't
you
know
would
all the
concur with the
details.
House is what you're saying,
I would concur with the House if it were me.
if it were on.
I'm gonna
If it
repeat.
were I and I were on but if your transportation committee chooses to do what they choose to do, I can only speak against it on the floor.
He's preparing his speech now. All right,
You know,
I think we have our
Sears-Bax
answer.
House proposal, that's gonna be like a news
Yeah.
headline.
Sears-Bax House proposal.
I do back my representative from Bennington.
So let me go back, because we now have a 12-minute break. We've been here since
I think you
1.
should take your break.
No, I'm asking, are there other questions that we have of the secretary or Bradley or Michelle? Committee at this point?
I'll just say,
Go ahead, Dick.
I'll just say publicly, I really appreciate Secretary Flynn and other members of the transportation agency who get back to us so quickly as a constituent concern. I wish all agencies did that, and I thank you for that.
All right, well, that's always good to hear positive feedback. Yeah.
And I was gonna just check.
You were gonna say what?
I was just gonna ask, I agree with Dick on that. I was wondering about the airport building in Coventry,
Right.
is that still on schedule
It is.
for this summer?
It is.
And
Work has actually begun, just not construction work.
Yes.
planning and all that, sure we've done it.
That's the Northern Borders
Yeah.
Regional Commission.
I would like to point out how fortunate the Northeast Kingdom is relative to the transportation infrastructure. We have the interstate that comes up from Boston, over from Littleton, comes into St. Johnsbury. We have the interstate north to the Canadian border. We have rail transport, and we actually have 2 airports. One is an international airport. And so I think I would like to, yes, the one in Coventry.
Yeah,
it
you
had to
mean
be-
that the
you have
interstate
to-
goes through Bobby's district?
My only point is, compared to northern New Hampshire, which has nothing, the northern part, and particularly the Northeast Kingdom, is very, very well positioned as it relates to particularly commerce with Canada. And we have a robust infrastructure there that people are always comparing us to New Hampshire, but north of Littleton, there's nothing. So I do think I don't know who planned it, but the only thing I wish we had done is a connector so that Route 2, we would actually have a connector from St. J to the Interstate 89 in Montpelier
That should
instead
have
of
been
the,
a,
you know, the
at
Route 2
least
corridor, but
a big
that's-
3-lane road, if not a.
well,
interstate.
but those days are done and,
Yeah,
you know, the old saying, if wishes were horses, beggars could ride, Senator Stars.
We should have never taken up the train tracks. We should have taken the train.
I just have a comment. I get rail trail and he gets an interstate.
Yeah, and an airport.
He gets an
An
airport.
international
And I
airport.
get a, and I get a rail trail and he gets
And
an
Jenny, and
interstate.
he's talking about everything that comes to Burlington or Chittenden County, and look at what he's got.
We send all the money up to him, so.
I
he
know.
can
There's
build
only
it.
That's why you gotta
three
make so
people
much
up
money.
there that can afford an airplane. It's to get all the people in, go to Jay.
You're gonna have electric airplanes.
So, unless there are further questions, the staff
Insults.
from AOT, I'm gonna suggest we take, now we're down to about an 8-minute break and come
Bobby
back
just took
to
my break.
liquor and